anime autopsy here, and I need you to sit down because we need to have a conversation about Luffy, kings, and the way this community has collectively decided the ending of One Piece by sheer vibes. Somewhere over the last 10 years, we all quietly signed a social contract that says obviously Luffy is the only possible rightful king of the seas, of the story, of everything. And listen to me, that certainty, that comfort blanket destiny narrative, it has made people completely blind to what Oda is actually doing with Blackbeard. You know exactly the category of post I'm talking about. New chapter drops, spoilers hit, and within 5 minutes your feed is just one cropped Gear 5 panel with Luffy grinning in some God Ray spotlight, captioned "This proves he's the chosen king." Hundreds of quote tweets, thousands of likes. Everyone chanting the same Oda is cooking mantra. And then 2 pages later, in the very same chapter, Oda cuts to Blackbeard on a literal elevated seat, framed from below, talking about fate and timing again, and the community just collectively scrolls past it. No screenshots, no threads, no essays, nothing. Here's the thing. This is not a sin, this is normal. Your brain wants the feel-good shonen prophecy, where the nice rubber boy with the funny laugh is the one true destined king. This is fine. But when that instinct becomes the default lens for every panel, the discourse turns lazy. People stop asking what the author intentionally planned and start treating every hype Luffy spread as divine confirmation, while shoving Blackbeard into the generic final boss category, as if he's just a speed bump on the way to the coronation ceremony. That is a complete and utter misread of what Oda's been writing. In Oda's actual system of kingship, the way the Void Century, the Will of D, and the Empty Throne are structured, Blackbeard is the rightful king, not Luffy. I am saying that plainly. I am saying that on purpose. And a tiny recent detail, a throwaway visual beat most fans only saw as cool art, quietly confirmed it for anyone who has been tracking Oda's foreshadowing patterns from Jaya to the Reverie. I can already hear you typing. There's no way Oda would crown Blackbeard. He's the villain, you clown. And I get it. I say this with love. I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing percentage of my adult life cross-referencing Blackbeard panels, SBS answers, and throne imagery like some pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I am not saying this lightly. I am not saying this for shock value. The difference here is that I'm going to walk you through the receipts. So before you close the tab and retreat back to the warm bath of Luffy is the chosen king, I need you to stay with me, because once we actually unpack how Oda builds intentional foreshadowing around succession and sovereignty, you're not going to be able to unsee what he just did with Teach. So before we even touch Blackbeard's teeth, scars, or weird blanket situation, we need to quarantine. One problem in this community. Everybody is about to sprint to the comments and type Luffy is joy, freedom, sun god, shut up. And listen to me, this is normal. This is how fandom brains are wired. We pick our emotional king first and then reverse engineer the evidence. But here's the thing. If we don't define what rightful king even means in One Piece, the entire next 2 hours turns into you arguing about vibes while I'm talking about constitutional law. We're not even in the same category of discussion. You're yelling about who deserves the throne. I'm tracking who the story and the world are actually building a throne for. So I need you to separate this into 3 layers in your head, because Oda clearly does. First, there's the emotional king. That's the character you want to win. The one whose speech is hit, whose panels you screenshot, whose gear transformations make you stand up in your chair and scare the neighbours. And most fans, that's Luffy. This is fine. This is not a sin. Luffy is the king of I Feel Something. Second, there's the narrative king. That's the figure the storytelling machinery crowns. The way the camera frames them, the way arcs orbit them, the way foreshadowing keeps bending back to their ideology. Luffy is obviously a narrative king of freedom, of breaking systems, of tearing down thrones. A story literally turns him into a sun god cartoon, and as the world government panic, the text is screaming, this is the guy who ends eras, an even universe legitimate king. The person who, according to the rules, symbols and buried contracts of this world, actually fits the criteria of sovereignty, the one whose bloodline, timing, will, and relationship to the Void Century machinery line up with the job description the author has been quietly writing for 25 plus years. And that is where Blackbeard starts to look very uncomfortable for people. My central claim is not Luffy isn't special. My claim is that Luffy is the emotional and thematic king of freedom, while Blackbeard is being positioned as the rightful king of the existing world order. The one candidate who actually checks the boxes Oda has planned for a sovereign within this rigged no-king system. One tears the table down. One was built to sit at it, and Oda just tipped his hand. A tiny, almost throwaway pairing of a visual and a line in a late chapter quietly aligns Teach with the empty throne itself, with the idea that behind this fake symbol of no monarch, there is a real intended monarch the world has been pretending doesn't exist. You scroll, your pattern-seeking monkey brain sees Jesus in toast and goes, "Cool spread," and you move on. Over the rest of this video, I'm going to walk you through this systematically. We're going to use a 3-part model I built for foreshadowing. What was pre-written, what was retrofitted, and what I'm calling structural coronation. Places where the writing itself forces a crown onto a character whether you want it there or not. By the end, you're not just going to know that Blackbeard fits the criteria for rightful king. You're going to see that Oda has been quietly making sure there was never anyone else who could. So before we start pointing at panels and screaming, "Oda crowned the swamp goblin," we need to do something extremely unsexy. We need to define terms. If we don't, this entire video collapses into "I like Luffy more" versus "I think Blackbeard is cooler." And that's not a literary argument, that's a shipping poll. Here's the thing, most fandom debates are not actually about the story, they're about preference in cosplay. Someone says Luffy is the rightful king, and what they mean is, my heart is attached to this rubber idiot. Someone else says Teach is the rightful king, and what they mean is, I enjoy chaos gremlin energy. This is not a sin, this is fine, this is normal. But this video is not about who you want on the throne. It's about what the writing is doing, whether you approve or not. So I need you to make a deal with me. For the next hour, we're not arguing taste, we're arguing receipts. When I say Blackbeard is structurally crowned, I'm not pointing at a vibe. I'm pointing at Jaya's "a man's dream never ends" speech, at the way Oda frames Teach on higher ground, at narration boxes that call him a man whose era has come, at author comments about having his ending planned since the start. Panels, angles, pacing, that's the evidence. Not my headcanon after 3 AM and 2 Red Bulls. And to keep those receipts organised, I'm using a 3-part model. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing. Foreshadowing is the intentional seed. Oda puts the gun on the mantle because he already knows who gets shot. Retrofitting is when he goes back to some random vase on the shelf and says, actually, that was Grandma's urn all along. This is not bad writing. This is how most long series survive. Pre-writing is the nuclear option. The author already has the entire house blueprinted before the first brick, then reveals the rooms out of order. When we ask, is Blackbeard the rightful king, we're really asking which of those categories his coronation lives in. Now, crucial distinction, Pirate King versus Rightful King. The series itself muddies this on purpose. Pirate King is a title. Anyone who reaches Laugh Tale and claims the treasure can stamp it on a business card. Rightful King is a structural role in the story's architecture. The person the entire political, mythic and visual system is bending toward. Oda weaponizes the confusion. He lets you assume Luffy equals destined Pirate King equals Rightful King so he can quietly thread Blackbeard through the world government, the empty throne, the will of D and all that coronation imagery while you're busy watching the Straw Hat. So listen to me. I'm not here to protect your headcanon. I'm here to walk you through the extremely uncomfortable possibility that Oda has been methodically crowning a villain while the community cheers for the hero. And once we start mapping those receipts, foreshadowing, retrofits, and pre-written endgame onto Blackbeard's actual appearances, you're going to see why Rightful King stops being an insult and starts being a job description. Which means next, we have to go back to where Oda first slipped the crown into the frame and trusted you not to notice. So to actually track that crown, we need a clean vocabulary. We need to stop calling every cool coincidence foreshadowing and start sorting what Oda does into 3 separate buckets. Because if you don't separate them, Blackbeard's entire arc just turns into one big wow Oda cooked shrug, and that helps nobody. First category, foreshadowing in the strict, boring English teacher sense. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants a detail early because they already know the payoff. Not this kind of fits later, not fans on Twitter connected 2 panels and had a religious experience. No, the key word is intentional. The setup exists because the payoff already exists in the author's head. Here's the thing, that's where Chekhov's gun comes in. You know the rule. If you hang a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it has to fire in Act 3. Real foreshadowing is not just there is a gun. Real foreshadowing is the author put the gun there because they already wrote the shooting. Laboon is a gun. Brooke is the bullet. Oda didn't wake up in Thriller Bark and go, oh hey, whale. He put the whale there because the skeleton was already in his notes. Second category, retrofitting. Retrofitting is when an author takes some earlier, vague, flexible element and later assigns it a new, specific meaning. You wrote a masked villain with no clear identity, and 10 volumes later you decide, actually, that was this guy all along. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, how most long-form storytelling survives contact with deadlines and editors and the author's own brain melting at 3 a.m. Retrofitting can still feel amazing. It can still feel planned. Your brain does not care. Your brain is a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and calls it foreshadowing. The problem is, if we call every satisfying retrofit Oda planned this from chapter 1, we erase the actual craft he's using and we miss where he's doing something even scarier. Which brings us to the third category the one Oda lives in, pre-writing. I need you to sit with this. Pre-writing is when the author knows the ending, knows the major mysteries, knows who the rightful king is, before chapter 1 ever hits a magazine. And then, instead of neatly foreshadowing the one locked-in path, they scatter loaded motifs all over the place. The D, the empty throne, inherited will, a man's dream never dies. Pattern interrupt. Those aren't hints, those are landmines. Oda isn't discovering those ideas in year 20. He's deciding when to step on them. Pre-writing means the gun is on the mantle not because maybe someone gets shot, but because the author has a whole war storyboarded and the room layout is flexible. He can turn a motif into strict foreshadowing if he stays faithful to the original plan, or he can retrofit a new angle onto it if serialization forces a change. Both moves are supported because the motif was built as a modular piece from day one, and in a weekly manga that's going to run over 1,000 chapters, this is normal. This is fine. You cannot pre-plan every beat, but you can pre-write the spine and then treat arcs, symbols and characters as adjustable crown pieces you snap onto that spine, which is exactly what Oda has been doing with Blackbeard, a pre-written king assembled out of foreshadowed parts. So next, I want to walk through the first time that crown shows up on screen and how Oda hides it under a dirty coat and a cherry pie. And here's where we need to slam the brakes on the fairy tale version of Oda that lives in the community's head. You know the one, the 4D chess grandmaster, who had every Blackbeard grin, every panel, every crown angle perfectly mapped out in a leather notebook before chapter 1. Listen to me. That Oda does not exist. That Oda would be an overclocked time-traveling AI, not a human who's been chained to a desk, drawing 15 to 20 pages every single week for a quarter century. I need you to actually picture that workload. You're scripting, thumbnailing, penciling, inking, toning, revising, all on a 7-day loop where weekend is a myth and vacation is a medical emergency. In the middle of that, an editor is pinging you with, Hey, Shonen Jump surveys say readers are dropping during slow political arcs. Can we speed this up? Or can you give this new character more panels? The merch team is excited. You are not calmly arranging Blackbeard's Chapter 1080 facial expressions in 1997. You are trying not to die. That's before you add the popularity war. One Piece is not being written in a vacuum. It is fighting for pages against other series every week. If a flashback dips in the rankings, it gets trimmed. If Blackbeard polls well, suddenly there's pressure to bring him back sooner, give him a splash page, push his crew. Magazine sales, reader surveys, and editorial gut feelings are constantly nudging pacing, and sometimes even plot direction. Not in a rewrite the ending way, but in a this arc is now 3 volumes shorter way that forces the author to compress or delay payoffs. So when fans insist Oda had every teach moment pre-rendered from Jaya to Hachinosu with 0 adjustment, I start to feel insane. That's not how weekly storytelling works. That's not how human brains work. That's the pattern-seeking monkey brain seeing Jesus in toast and calling it a production schedule. Here's the thing. In this environment, retrofitting is not cheating. Retrofitting is a survival tool. You intentionally leave open doors in your story. Mysterious scars, ambiguous lines about fate, a shadowy crew member in the background, so that when the magazine says, hey, more Blackbeard now, you can walk back through those doors and assign new, sharper meaning. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-running manga stay coherent under absurd conditions. So yes, some Blackbeard elements are pre-written spine, the D, the anti-Luffy mirror, the king imagery. Some are clean foreshadowing, Jaya's a man's dream never ends, the cherry pie, the scars on Shanks. And some are ruthless retrofits where Oda looked at an old panel and went, oh, that's my opening. This is fine. This is normal. And it matters. Because once you saw which parts of Blackbeard's kingship were always planned, which were foreshadowed, and which were retrofitted on demand, you can see how central Oda actually wants his claim to the throne to be. So next, I want to go back to that first dirty coat appearance and start tagging which category each crown detail really falls into. So if we're going back to that first dirty coat appearance, we need to be very clear on what we're actually hunting for. Not vibes, not coincidences, not wow, this panel aged well screenshots. We're hunting for proof that the setup exists. Because the payoff was already sitting in Oda's brain, fully armed and dangerous. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing, in the strict sense I'm using, is not this earlier scene can be reinterpreted to fit the twist. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally writes that earlier scene because the twist is already planned. The arrow doesn't just point forward in time. The arrow is fired from the ending backward into chapter 200, or 50, or 1. Intent first, panel second. Let me give you the most basic narrative example. Act 1. You meet a character who has this oddly specific fear of enclosed metal spaces. It's weirdly detailed, it comes up twice, and it doesn't really pay off in that arc. Act 3. The climax hinges on that same character refusing to get into an escape pod, choosing to stay behind and manually launch it. The fear explains the decision. The decision retroactively justifies the earlier scenes. That is foreshadowing. The author clearly planted Act 1 because they already knew the Act 3 beat. Now, this is storytelling 101. Most competent authors do this across chapters, across a volume, maybe across a single novel. You outline, you seed, you pay off. This is fine. This is normal. But doing that across 25 years of serialization, across hundreds of characters and political factions, while your editors are yelling about popularity polls, that is a different sport. That's why you need this hybrid of ruthless planning and terrifying flexibility just to not drown in your own notebooks. So, practically, how are we judging Oda here? I need you to keep 3 quiet questions in the back of your head every time we point at a hint. First, what's the time gap between setup and payoff? A chapter-to-chapter callback is cute. A Jaya line paying off in Egghead is suspicious in the best way. Second, how specific was the setup? His mysterious doesn't count. A scar, a repeated phrase, a visual motif that lines up one-to-one with a later reveal, that moves into foreshadowing territory. Third, and this is where the community gets shy, has Oda ever actually said he had that payoff in mind? Interviews, SBS, early data books. When he tells you Brook and Laboon were planned together, that's evidence. When he shrugs and goes, "Yeah, I decided that later," that drops the scene into the retrofit category. This is not a sin. Retrofitting is still good writing. It's just not what we're labeling as genuine foreshadowing. And listen to me. Under that strict standard, some of Blackbeard's earliest appearances, especially in Jaya, start to look very different. That man's dream never ends speech, the way he's framed as anti-Luffy, as another D, whose timing is chosen by fate, those are not random fat guy in a bar moments. In the next section, we're going to walk through those panels and ask, on each one, whether Oda was already crowning his rightful king years before Marineford even existed on our radar. And over here's where we need to introduce the dirty word that makes the community foam at the mouth: retrofitting. And listen to me. If you're already cracking your knuckles to type bad writing in the comments, I need you to hang on for about 4 minutes. Retrofitting is simple. Retrofitting is when an author looks back at something they left vague or flexible and decides, okay, that was actually about this all along, and then they write forward as if that was always the plan. Not a coincidence. Not pure foreshadowing. A retrofit. You had an empty room in the house. Later you decide, that's the secret lab now. Here's the thing. This is not a sin. This is not automatically lazy writing. It only becomes a problem when the new meaning contradicts what was on the page, or it snaps the emotional logic the story already built. If early Blackbeard was a coward who hated risk, and then suddenly he's Mr. Bet everything on the dark, that would be a bad retrofit. But that's not what's happening. We need to be a bit honest about industry reality. In a long-running manga, the author doesn't know which weirdo background guy is going to become a fan favourite, which mystery will actually matter 10 years later, or even how long they'll have to pay something off. But they build in wiggle room. They write characters with gaps, with ambiguous pasts, with lines that feel big but aren't nailed to a single reveal yet. That's not cowardice. That's survival. Fans, on the other hand, want everything to be foreshadowing from chapter 1 because it flatters our pattern recognition. It makes us feel smart, that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and then writes a 4-0 tweet thread about it. If Oda admits, "Yeah, I decided later that Teach would steal Whitebeard's fruit," a bunch of people treat that as a downgrade. But from a storytelling perspective, this is fine. This is normal. Creators need the freedom to change course without being crucified. If the community punishes any admitted improvisation, you're basically demanding that a 25-year weekly marathon be run on a single outline written in 1997. That's not how human brains, editors, or jump surveys work. But where does Blackbeard fit into this? Some of Teach's later power-ups and political moves are almost certainly retrofits. 2 devil fruits, framed with that 2-headed crown monster imagery, that reads like Oda saw the potential in the darkness guy and then went, okay, he's not just a strong pirate, he's the rival king. Everything about him needs to escalate. His sudden role as a territorial sovereign, attacking kingdoms and scooping up islands the way Luffy scoops up friends, feels like a retrofit of his early chase your dream when the time is right ideology into full-on imperial ambition. But notice what that actually means. It doesn't weaken his claim to the throne. It proves Oda is doubling down on him as the other D, who can plausibly sit in that seat. The retrofits are all in one direction, toward kingship. In the next section, we're going to dissect which pieces of Blackbeard are pre-written crown, which are foreshadowing polish, and which are retrofits welded on later to make him the only real rival to Luffy's coronation. And to show you how badly our community misreads this stuff, we need to step off the sunny for a second and walk into the Leaf Village. Naruto is neutral ground. You and I don't have our One Piece emotions tied up in it the same way, so I need you to remember the Toby era honestly. Goofy, masked, yelling Toby is a good boy, getting punted by Daidara, doing the whole clown routine. Then the mask cracks, boom, Obito Chiha. Overnight, every fan became a forensic genius. Obviously, it was Obito the whole time. Just look at the mask design. The spiral is Kamui. The one eye hole, the vague trauma comments, the Kakashi parallels, the way he talks about the past. Except here's the thing. Most of those so-called hints are the storytelling equivalent of a horoscope. One eye hole, that could have been Obito, Izuna, random secret Uchiha cousin number 7. Viral mask, that's just creepy mask guy 101. Vague lines about the past. Every edgy villain in Naruto talks like they just discovered philosophy on a late night YouTube playlist. The Kakashi parallels only feel laser targeted once you already know the answer. And then you look at the author side. Hachinosu has been pretty open that Toby's identity was not a perfectly locked 700 chapter plan. In interviews and production notes, he said Toby went through different possibilities. At one point, he was going to be Madara for real. At another, he was more of an abstract mask of hatred than a specific person. The Obito decision solidified later. And once that happened, the team went back and made sure the pieces could line up. That's not divine foreshadowing, that's retrofitting. Kishimoto created a flexible setup. Masked weirdo, single eye, Uchiha ties, attitude that could bend towards several backstories. Then, when he finally picked Obito, he and his editors combed through the old material and emphasized the bits that supported that answer, downplayed the contradictions, and smoothed the edges so it felt intentional. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-running series survive weekly serialization without collapsing under their own law. And listen to me, our pattern-seeking monkey brains hate this. We would rather see Jesus in toast than admit an author left themselves options. So we label every adjustable setup genius foreshadowing because it flatters us for noticing it. We retroactively promote retrofits into the foreshadowing category, then build entire theories on the assumption that the plan was perfect from day one. Which means if we mislabel retrofits as foreshadowing in Naruto, we are almost certainly doing the same thing in One Piece. That's the problem. When fans insist Oda always meant Luffy to be the only rightful king, they're treating every crown-shaped panel as proof of pre-written destiny instead of asking whether some of those moments of flexible setups Oda can still steer. In the next section, we're going to turn that same harsh lens on Blackbeard and separate what had to be planned from what can be welded on later to make him a contender for the throne. This is fine. This is normal. But we need to name it before we can see what Oda is really doing. So here's where I confess something that would get me kicked out of a real literature department in about 10 seconds. I don't actually have a proper academic term for the specific brand of insanity Oda is doing with the D, the throne, and kingship. I have checked the toolbox. It's empty. So for the sake of this video, I'm calling it pre-writing. Now listen to me, because this is where the categories really matter. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants a detail knowing the payoff. Retrofitting is when they go back and assign new meaning to something they hadn't fully planned. Pre-writing is different. Pre-writing is when an author loads the gun, puts it on the mantle, writes this gun will be important, but does not yet decide who gets shot, at what time, or in which room of the mansion. The intention is crystal clear. The exact payoff is not. The D initial is going to matter. The void century is going to matter. The empty throne is going to be a lie. Those are loaded elements. But the specific configuration of who sits where, who dies when, and who gets crowned can stay flexible for decades. Here's the thing. Almost no one else is doing this at Oda's scale. Most authors can barely keep a trilogy straight without a wiki. Oda is out here pre-writing planetary constants. He drops the D in Chapter 1 territory, hints at a fake no-king system with the empty throne hundreds of volumes later, and keeps both concepts open-ended enough that he can plug new characters, new revelations, and new political structures into them without breaking the original promise. This is not bad writing. This is in fact the only way you survive a 25-year serialization without turning into a continuity cryptid. Oda seeds the motif, nails down the thematic function, but leaves the casting call open. The story demands a secret king. The story demands a corrupted heir to the D. He has already built the socket. He just has to decide which plug goes in. And Blackbeard is one of the biggest pre-written sockets in the entire series. Teacher's D, his freakish body, the twin and triple imagery, the way he moves like a rival sovereign instead of a simple pirate captain, all of that is clearly intentional long before Oda nails down the exact mechanics of 2 devil fruits or the final map of the world's throne politics. When Teach gives the man's dream never ends speech in Jaya, that is not random characterization. That is Oda circling a node he knows will sit on the same axis as Luffy, the world government and the empty throne, even if the final geometry of that axis is still negotiable. So in the next section, I need you to put on your pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast goggles, but with discipline. We're going to go through Blackbeard's appearances and sort them. What is straightforward foreshadowing? What smells of retrofit? And what feels like a pre-written anchor Oda has been orbiting since before Chapter 1. Because once we sort those piles, the question of who the rightful king is stops being a theory and starts reading like procedure every single week. So if we're sorting Blackbeard's scenes into piles, we also need to zoom all the way back to where Oda started stacking the board. East Blue. Because listen to me, East Blue is not just Luffy's tutorial island. It's a controlled lab environment where Oda stress tests one idea over and over. This world is full of fake kings. Look at the rogues gallery. Morgan is literally wearing a crown-shaped hat, strutting around Shellstown as if he owns the place, abusing the Marines logo as his personal family crest. Zoro builds a whole aristocrat persona to steal a kingdom's wealth, staging his own death just to cosplay nobility. Arlong carves out a miniature regime in Kokoyashi, taxing every villager for the crime of existing. None of these guys have a mandate. They have power, uniforms or money, and they roleplay king until someone punches the costume off. Here's the thing, that's not random villain flavor. That's category design. Oda is teaching you what rule looks like in this world. Arbitrary, local, and almost always fraudulent. The Marines show up, sure, but they're inconsistent. Sometimes they're heroic, Garp's reputation, Smoker's instincts. Sometimes they're Morgan. The world government, it's a stamp on a sale, a logo on a document. No face, no presence, no coherent moral authority. You feel governed, but you never feel ruled. And in that vacuum, what's the only concrete throne anyone talks about? Pirate King. From Chapter 1, Roger isn't a politician. He's a mythic sovereign. His death doesn't just start an era of pirates. It decapitates the world's symbolic leadership. The one guy everyone agrees sat on some sort of metaphorical throne is gone, executed in public, and his last act is to tell the entire ocean, fight over my crown. This is not a sin in terms of writing. This is intentional scaffolding. Oda is pre-writing a world with a throne-shaped hole. East Blue's structure is absurdly consistent. Each island has its own micro-tyrant, its own failed system, its own citizens praying for someone real to show up. Luffy keeps knocking the heads off these discount kings, but notice what he never does. Never stays. He never governs. And he plants a flag of freedom and walks away. This is fine. This is normal for his character. But politically, it leaves the macro question unanswered. So by the time we ever meet Blackbeard, the storytelling has already done years of quiet foreshadowing for a specific role. Someone who doesn't just steal treasure or topple a town, but actually sees the global vacancy. I need you to hold that in your head, because when Teach finally steps onto the stage in Jaya and starts talking about dreams, fate and the age of pirates, he isn't improvising a career path. He's moving like a man who's been reading the same throne-shaped hole we have. So we cut to Jaya, a nothing island, a nothing bar, and Oda quietly drops one of the most important throne scenes in the entire series while everyone's busy laughing at Bellamy's forehead. This is where he literally seats his two kings back to back and dares you not to notice. You remember the setup. Luffy, Zoro and Nami walk into that dingy tavern, get clowned on by Bellamy's crew, and the whole room erupts in this sneering chorus about dreams are dead. Luffy gets punched, drink spilled, blood on the floor, and the camera doesn't cut to some mysterious silhouette in a castle. It cuts to the drunk in the corner, demolishing cherry pie and ale. That's Teach, and listen to me. This is not random flavor NPC behavior. Luffy and Blackbeard start arguing about food, of all things, mirroring each other's reactions beat for beat. Luffy loves the meat, hates the pie. Teach loves the pie, hates the drink. They both yell their opinions to the room, both double down, both overreact in the exact same cartoonish way, but back to back at the bar, never actually turning to see each other, having a shared scene without eye contact. Two sides of the same coin, separated by a plank of wood and 800 chapters of payoff. Here's the thing. Oda doesn't just mirror their appetites and call it a day. He hands Blackbeard one of the most important ideological lines in One Piece. A man's dream never ends. That sentiment, that exact category of line, is usually reserved for Rayleigh, Whitebeard, Roger-adjacent sages who clearly embody the series' core philosophy. And yet here's this greasy upstart, a future war criminal, delivering the thesis statement of the story more cleanly than half the good guys. You do not give that sentence to a throwaway villain. You do not anchor the entire debate about dreams and the age of pirates in the mouth of someone you might turn into a gag antagonist later. If you think that, I need you to reconsider what intentional writing looks like. This is foreshadowing in the strict sense. The author already knows this man is the rival dreamer, so he plants him in the exact same ideological space as the protagonist. And visually, Oda is screaming it. The panel composition frames the bar as an axis. Luffy on one side, Teach on the other, both occupying symmetrical space, both drawn with matching body language and exaggerated reactions. They are equal in weight on the page. The world's most low-rent coronation ceremony. The crown isn't on their heads yet, but the imaginary throne is sitting dead center between them. This is not retrofitting. This is not the community doing pattern-seeking monkey brain and seeing Jesus in the tavern floorboards. From this point, Teach is clearly planned as Luffy's dark mirror. Same D, same obsession with fate and timing, same dream of the Pirate King's seat, just warped into conquest instead of freedom. In other words, Jaya's bar is the first time Oda quietly seats the future King of Freedom and the future King of Darkness on opposite sides of the same invisible throne. And the next time he does this coronation trick, he won't need the bar in the middle at all. So once Oda seats them across from each other in Jaya, he does something even nastier. He rewinds the tape and shows you that the world has already been rearranging itself around Teach. Remember how you first even hear the name Blackbeard, not as a random pirate, not as some background wanted poster. You hear it from Ace, and the context is nuclear. This is the man who broke Whitebeard's code. This is the subordinate whose betrayal is so severe that it mobilizes the Yonko's right hand as a one-man execution squad. That's not a casual narrative introduction. That is the author putting a spotlight on a silhouette and telling you, without saying it, this man matters. Pass. Here's the thing. In a normal story, the traitor who kills a crewmate is a mid-boss. A morality lesson. You don't burn one of your most charismatic characters on a globe-spanning manhunt just to resolve HR issues. Ace chasing Teach is Oda signaling category. This isn't family drama. This is succession drama. Now, drop that into Drum. On the surface, Drum is a chopper arc and a Tyrant King gets clowned arc. But buried in the snow is one of the most important pieces of Blackbeard pre-writing in the entire series. The way Dalton explains it, Teach's crew doesn't just roll through for snacks. They topple Wapple, annihilate the Royal Guard, plant their flag for a moment, and then leave the kingdom in absolute chaos. That's not random piracy. That's a proto-king running a field test. He walks into a medically vital, politically strategic winter nation, proves he can erase a monarch in an afternoon, and then doesn't bother ruling. Why? Because at this stage, he's not collecting taxes. He's collecting proof. Proof that the throne is something he can take, on command, whenever the timing is right. And Ace's dialogue keeps reinforcing that this isn't just a rogue underling with anger issues. Over and over, Ace talks about Teach, in terms of timing and fate. He stayed on Whitebeard's ship for decades waiting for his devil fruit. He moves only when the conditions he's imagined finally line up. Ace isn't describing a hot-headed usurper. He's describing a man whose ambition is so planned it scares him. I need you to hear that. The freest man on the seas is unnerved by how calculated this guy is. Now plug that into the Will of D conversation. Blackbeard is one of the very few confirmed Ds, but where Roger and Luffy stumble into destiny by chasing joy, Teach hunts it. He studies the board, studies the fruit, studies the error, and then makes the move that manufactures the fated moment. He's not the storm, he's the guy who reads the weather reports and sails directly into the hurricane on purpose. This is why we need to stop reading Drum and the Ace Hunt as disconnected side quests. They're Oda pre-writing a different D. Archetype. A king who claims the title through conquest and calculation, not inherited vibes and happy accidents. And if that sounds abstract, listen to me, because the next time Teach topples a kingdom, Oda stops pretending it's a test run. And this is where I need you to slow down, because I can already hear the comment section revving up in the background. No way. Are you saying Blackbeard is going to beat Luffy and sit on some final throne at the end? Ratio. Unsub. No, that's not the argument. That's not even the category of argument I'm making. Here's the thing. There's a difference between outcome and legitimacy. There's a difference between who wins the revolution and who was actually the rightful heir to the old regime. Those are not always the same person, and in good storytelling they are very often intentionally not the same person. Think about it in basic writing terms. An author can design a crown prince whose bloodline, ideology, and methods perfectly match a corrupt empire. That character can be the correct king of that rotten system, the one all the foreshadowing and political machinery are quietly pointing toward. And then the story can still end with that guy getting steamrolled by a peasant uprising. This is not a sin. This is normal. So when I say Blackbeard is the rightful king, I'm not saying he's going to retire on Raftel with a 4010 and a sun hat. I'm saying, if you actually map how power works in One Piece right now, the world government lies, the Yonko stalemate, the bounty economy, the way kingdoms are traded as assets, Teach is the one character who fits that logic so cleanly it's almost boring. He sees his kingdoms the way the government does. Not for adventure, for leverage. He treats devil fruits as strategic weapons, not toys. He builds a fleet that mirrors the Marines' structure. When the Reverie exposes the empty throne as a prop, Blackbeard is out there doing the opposite of that performance, openly acting as a rival sovereign, carving his own empire in real time. In other words, he is the rightful king of this world order, the one the system deserves, the one its rules were basically designed to reward. And that's why Luffy doesn't actually compete with him on those terms. Luffy is not trying to be the optimal CEO of Pirate Capitalism Incorporated. He doesn't care about the stock price of Hachinosu. His entire deal is refusing the categories the government uses to measure worth. Freedom over control, friends over territory, impulse over 5-year plan. So structurally, Oda needs both. He needs a protagonist who breaks the game, and he needs an antagonist who plays the game perfectly. So you can see the game for what it is. Luffy is the board flipper. Teach is the guy who finally fully masters the board. And listen to me. Once you read it that way, all the throne and crown imagery around Blackbeard stops being random edgy villain sauce and starts reading as Oda very calmly crowning him. In the next section, we're going to walk through those panels. Who sits where? Who stands? Who's framed above whose head? And I'm going to show you how the author visually tells you this is the king of the old world before Luffy ever gets a shot at ending it. So if Oda is calmly crowning Blackbeard, we need to understand the visual crown first. I need you to stop thinking of kingship as just a title in a Vivre card and start thinking of it as a camera angle, a chair, and a circle behind someone's head. Here's the thing. Oda's been absurdly consistent about what rule looks like on the page. The empty throne at Murioja is the cleanest example. Huge staircase, cathedral framing, a single ornate seat at the top, and rows of swords pointing up at it. The entire point of that scene is no one sits here, therefore no king, which only works because Oda has already trained you for 1,000 chapters that the person in the highest seat in the room is the one in charge. It's visual foreshadowing for absence. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Doflamingo lounging on that ridiculous toy-flanked chair in Dressrosa, legs crossed, camera low, subordinates literally stacked beneath him in the panel. Wapalin Drum, perched above starving citizens, framed from below so his goofy cylinder hat still reads as a crown. Even minor monarchs get the treatment. Elevated dais, everyone else below, speech bubbles dropping down from the throne like commands from heaven. Oda doesn't have to tell you they rule. He just makes you look up at them. And then there's the crown-adjacent stuff. Oda loves putting halos, sunbursts, or spiked architecture directly behind heads. Luffy with the sun behind him in Skypiea, or Marine Ford, rays forming a rough crown. Cobra speaking at the Reverie with that circular window framing him. A literal halo of royal legitimacy. Imu's silhouette in front of that massive ringed symbol. Spikes radiating outward. An unholy crown. This is not subtle. This is the author using composition as a category of meaning. Circular behind the head equals sanctified authority, whether that's heroic, tyrannical, or eldritch. Light is the third pillar. Oda constantly cheats the eyeline. He'll put a king character 1 or 2 tiers above the crowd, then shoot from a low angle so their head almost breaks the panel border. Think Kaido on Onigashima's skull dome, or Enel on his cloud throne literally above the island. You feel ruled before anyone says your majesty. And crucially, this is not a sin of randomness. This is not Oda going, throne shot would be cool here. He does not hand out thrones as casual villain hype. When someone is seated above others, when the panel bows to their height, that is an intentional signal about who currently owns that narrative space. Who is king of this room, this island, this era, which is where the problem starts for the community. Because when Oda gives that treatment to Blackbeard, fans file it under cool spread, scary villain and move on. This is fine, this is normal, we're all pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast. But listen to me, in the next section, when we walk panel by panel through teachers' entrances, his chairs, his halos of chaos, you're going to watch those cool spreads quietly turn into coronation scenes. So when you get to Hachinosu after all those cool spreads, I need you to stop treating it as a generic villain lair. Hachinosu is not evil water 7 inches or Marineford, but edgy. It's Oda running a simulation. It's a prototype pirate kingdom. A controlled environment where he can test drive Blackbeard as an actual monarch before he lets him crash into the final war. Here's the thing. On paper, Hachinosu is a lawless pirate haven. No government, no marines, no laws, just chaos. Except, it's not actually lawless, is it? There are rules about territory, rules about bounties, rules about who gets executed in the middle of the square and who gets an audience with the boss. Everyone there answers to one sovereign will, and that will is teach. You don't negotiate with committees on Hachinosu. You petition a king. Look at how Oda stages those panels. Blackbeard is constantly above. On a balcony, on a higher rock, on a throne-adjacent chair surrounded by his titanic captains. The composition is Royal Court 101, retainers below, supplicants in the dirt, the Lord framed large and central. It's foreshadowing by staging. You don't have to slap a crown on his head when the entire page layout is already doing the coronation for you. Now compare that to Luffy's Grand Fleet. Those guys swear fealty, they drink the cups, they literally offer themselves as vassals, and Luffy goes, nah, I don't want to be a big shot. He rejects the category of formal king. He runs from centralized authority. This is not a sin. This is just who he is. Meanwhile, over on Hachinosu, Blackbeard is doing the exact opposite experiment. He demands loyalty. He collects powerful subordinates, territories, and tribute. Where Luffy stumbles into influence and then shrugs, Teach hoards it on purpose. So Hachinosu becomes a microcosm of his end goal. It's the world he wants, in miniature, a kingdom of pirates, where the only law is his mood, and the only constitution is his laugh. Remember how he moves against Amazon Lily? How he negotiates with the Marines? How he treats captured Marines as bargaining chips? That's not random villain behavior. That's sovereign behavior. He's acting as a head of state, whose state just happens to be a floating crime island. And Oda is very intentional here. The community tends to file Hachinosu under cool new setting and move on. This is fine. This is normal. But listen to me. An author who has already planned his endgame does not accidentally build a dark mirror of Laugh Tale, populate it with warlords and monsters, and then sit his main antagonist at the top of that food chain for fun. Because once you see Hachinosu as the practice crown, you have to ask a worse question. If this is the rehearsal, what does opening night, the real throne Blackbeard is aiming for, actually look like? And here's where Oda stops rehearsing and puts Teach on stage in front of the whole world. Impel Down is the moment Blackbeard stops being a creepy rumour and starts acting as a rival sovereign. He doesn't sneak in, grab a fruit and dip. He walks through the front door of the world government's hell prison, announces himself, and then raids it for manpower. That's not a power grind, that's conscription. He's not a pirate captain bolstering a crew. He's a warlord tearing open the deepest dungeon on earth to handpick monsters the way a king assembles knights from disgraced noble houses. You do not recruit Shiryu, Katarina Devon and the rest because you want buddies. You recruit them because you are building a court. And the way he does it matters. He doesn't apologize, doesn't hide. He strolls through Magellan, gets wiped, and still walks out with an army. Because his entire plan is calibrated around the fact that the Marines are distracted by a bigger war. Listen to me. This is intentional geopolitical writing, not random chaos. Oda is showing you a third power entering the board, one that treats a world government super prison as a talent agency. Then Marineford happens and Teach escalates from new king building forces to rival emperor crashing the coronation of two empires at once. He arrives late on purpose. He waits until Whitebeard and the Marines have torn each other apart, until the old lion is mortally wounded and the government's justice is bleeding out on live TV. Then he walks in with his Impel Down freak show and tries to steal the show. This is not a sin. This is not sloppy timing. This is a planned entrance from a character who literally told us in Jaya that timing is everything. And at the center of that spectacle is the most on-the-nose coronation ritual Oda has ever drawn. The theft of the Gura Gura no Mi. We need to stop treating this as a generic power-up. Whitebeard is the man closest to One Piece, the old Yonko king in everything but title. When Teach throws that tarp over his body and emerges with Whitebeard's fruit, Oda is staging a dark inversion of inheritance law. He is not just stealing a weapon. He is ripping out the heart and crown of the old regime and stapling them onto himself. Two fruits, two empires challenged, one body, and he does it as publicly as possible. Cameras rolling, ears watching, pirates watching. The whole community of in-universe spectators forced to see this one man stand over Whitebeard's corpse and laugh. He is humiliating the Marines for failing to protect their symbol, humiliating Whitebeard's era by desecrating its greatest figure and announcing with zero subtlety, here's the thing, that's a coronation tour. Impel Down is him forging a dark round table. Marineford is him crashing a royal funeral and stealing the crown off the corpse. None of this reads as a side villain grinding XP. This is a rival monarch systematically tearing down the old world's icons, so that when he plants his own flag on the true throne, nobody can pretend they didn't see it coming. Which raises the uncomfortable question the story keeps tiptoeing around. If Teach has already declared himself king in everything but name, what happens when he finally walks into the room with the so-called empty throne? He walks into the room and finds out the throne was never empty in the first place. We need to talk about that room. The reverie scene is Oda doing political theory with cartoon dragons. We've got the giant staircase at Marijua, the so-called empty throne at the top, and 20 weapons stabbed around it, one for each founding monarch of the world government. The Gorosei give this very solemn speech. There is no single king of the world. The throne is empty. The 20 nations share power equally. It's the UN cosplay version of We're All in This Together. Except here's the thing. That entire tableau is propaganda. It is a carefully staged theatre performance for rulers who already know they're being managed, and for citizens who will never get close enough to see the dust on those swords. The weapons are props. The emptiness is a prop. The speech is a prop. It's not a constitution. It's a set piece. The no king line is there to solve one problem. If everyone believes there is no throne to seize, then nobody will try to seize it. And then Oda immediately cuts to the punchline. We go from the public ceremony to the private reality. A shadowy figure walking up those same steps, sitting on that same empty throne, surrounded by the same 20 weapons. Imu doesn't just exist. Imu literally occupies the space the world was told is unoccupiable. That's not subtle foreshadowing. That's the author grabbing you by the collar and saying, listen to me, the symbol is rigged. This is where the community keeps drifting into pattern-seeking monkey mode. We see Imu and go, secret final boss, mysterious god king, done. This is normal, this is fine, but if you actually follow Oda's own internal rules, the rightful king of this world is not whoever finds a big treasure and vibes about freedom on a sunny hilltop. By the story's own political logic, the true monarch is whoever can control or replace the person on that throne. The system has already defined the job description. The crown is just invisible ink. So I need you to notice the category error here. Luffy's dream is about the sea, about an age of piracy with no one above anyone. Imu's throne is about the land, about centralized hidden sovereignty. Two different games, every single week, two different boards. And who's the one character whose entire career has been about moving from pirate hierarchy into world hierarchy? Who raids kingdoms, bargains with the government, collects devil fruits as strategic weapons, and openly calls himself a king, while the supposed kingless world pretends that word doesn't exist? It's not Luffy. It's Teach. Blackbeard's trajectory isn't toward a metaphorical throne. It's pointed straight at that specific rigged chair in Marijua. Politically, symbolically, narratively, he's the one behaving as if he knows there is a hidden monarch that can be overthrown and replaced. The real question is, what happens to the entire idea of no king when the most ambitious D in history decides he wants Imu's seat for himself? So here's where that tiny detail I teased at the start finally cashes in. We've been talking symbols, we've been talking structures, but I need you to look at one recent, very specific image of Blackbeard and then remember the so-called empty throne. I'm talking about the Hachinosu sequence, where Blackbeard is framed on his own island, perched above his fleet and his captives, essentially on a jagged stone dais. The panel pulls back, low angle, his body huge in the frame, crew and ships fanning out beneath him. The sky is a dark, swirling mess behind his silhouette. No literal crown, no literal chair, but compositionally, that's a coronation shot. Now compare that to how Oda introduced the empty throne in Marijua. Same low angle, same receding steps. The camera climbs a vertical axis toward a central figure, or in that first case, a conspicuously absent one. The Gorosei ring the base of the platform the way Blackbeard's titanic captains ring his rocky perch. The throne is supposedly empty. Hachinosu is very obviously not. And then Oda cheats. Because right after we learn the No King story, he shows us Imu sitting on that throne in a shadowed off-kilter shot. Again, the same visual grammar. Deep perspective, figure centered at the top of a vertical hierarchy, foreground characters literally looking up. That's the author telling you in cinematic language. This is the true sovereign. But when he later gives Blackbeard that Hachinosu spread, framed as a lord surveying his domain, with narration about the Yonko system and the balance of the world, that's not just wow cool villain entrance. That is Oda reusing his kingship template. This is intentional reuse, not coincidence, not me being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Listen to me. The dialogue Oda drops there is doing the same work. Blackbeard is not just ranting about Pirate King. He talks about ruling the seas, about how the world will be ours, about seizing entire kingdoms as bargaining chips. That's not a guy chasing a title on Roger's level. That's a guy talking in Imu's category. King of everything, not king of a subculture. Here's the thing. When an author has already established a visual language for sovereignty, the empty throne shot, the Imu reveal, even the way Akainu is framed at Marineford Summit, and then he drops Blackbeard into the same camera grammar, you have to stop calling it accidental. This is foreshadowing in the strict sense. Planned, structural, baked in. From this point in the video onward, we need to stop treating Teach as a generic final boss. We're going to treat him as the story's rightful king of the old world order. The one character who both understands that there is a secret throne and fully intends to sit on it, which raises the real nightmare question. If Blackbeard is the rightful king of the old world, what does that force Luffy to become instead? So here's where the DG stops being a meme, middle, initial, and turns into an actual succession crisis. We know the basics the community recites on autopilot. The D are tied to the Void Century, branded the natural enemies of the gods, always showing up with storms, upheaval, and that creepy habit of smiling at death. Goldie Roger, Jaguar D, BR, Saul, Luffy, Law Teach. Every time a D walks on stage, the world government starts sweating and the weather starts unionizing. But here's the thing. That same inheritance is being read in two completely different ways by our two main heirs. Luffy's relationship to the D is almost aggressively casual. He doesn't research it. He doesn't ask Garp when Robin spells out natural enemy of the gods. He basically shrugs and goes back to eating. He stumbles into the implications of his name, the way you trip over a curb you didn't know existed. His writing is all about chaotic liberation, breaking gears off regimes, toppling tyrants, inspiring others to stand up. But he never actually campaigns for a throne. The closest he gets is accidentally collecting territories because people insist on calling him their boss while he's already sailing away. Teach is the opposite. Teach treats the D as a manual. He is hyper-aware of fate and timing. He literally lectures Luffy and Zoro on Jaya about how a man's dream never ends, delivering what sounds author-approved, then uses that same ideology as fuel for an intentional climb to the biggest seat on the planet. He waits decades on Whitebeard's crew for the right fruit, moves during Marineford at the exact moment the world is watching, and openly hunts the title of Pirate King as a global crown, not a romantic nickname. Oda frames both as chosen. That's the foreshadowing problem we need to untangle. Luffy gets coincidences that are too precise to be coincidences. Meeting Shanks, eating the Nika fruit that the government guarded for centuries, being at the exact islands that unlock the Void Century. Everyone reacts to him as if destiny is breathing down his neck, but he resists every label. Joy Boy, Sun God, Future King, he treats them as background noise to the only category he cares about, being free. Teach, on the other hand, leans into destiny. Ace spells it out. This man is dangerous because he believes he's chosen. Teach talks about inherited wills, about eras, about timing. He treats the D name as a ticket to rightful dominion under the old system's rules. If the world is a rigged monarchy hiding behind an empty throne, then the one who seizes the real throne is the legitimate winner of that legacy. So within the D narrative, Blackbeard is the heir who actually tries to inherit the world's crown. By the logic of the ancient game, conquer, centralize, rule. He is the rightful king of that bloodline. Which forces a brutal question for the next section. If Teach is the D who claims the throne, what does that make Luffy's revolution against the throne itself? If Teach is the D who actually plays the ancient game, we need to talk about the cheat code he's running. Because the crown he's claiming, it's not meant for a human being. It's meant for a monster that shouldn't exist. Listen to me. The series does not shut up about how one body cannot handle two devil fruits. We get it from the community in-universe as common sense. We get it from the Gorosei as hard rule. We get it hammered in as you explode and die, do not pass go. That's the category. One fruit, one soul, one person. And then Marineford happens, the curtain drops over Whitebeard's corpse, and Teach walks out with darkness in one hand and earthquakes in the other, laughing. The story isn't just breaking a rule there. The story is telling you the rule was written so you'd feel the break. Here's the thing, Oda doesn't just tell you Teach is abnormal. He draws him as something fundamentally wrong. Go back to those big spreads, the ones where Blackbeard is this swollen, looming mass, teeth everywhere, coat flaring out, and the whole crew lined up beneath him. They're not just a pirate gang, they're arranged like subjects at the feet of a grotesque king. The camera sits low, he fills the sky, multiple speech bubbles overlap so his laugh almost feels like it's coming from more than one mouth. Hydra energy. Cerberus energy. You don't need a text box that says two-headed monster when the composition is already screaming it. Fans have gone full pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast over his body, and this is not a sin. This is normal. Multiple faces on his Jolly Roger. The he never sleeps line from Jaya. Marco explicitly saying his body is odd at Marineford. So you get the multiple souls theory, the Cerberus Zoan theory, the chimera, the conjoined twin, the weird physiology that splits his identity. The details differ, but every version lands in the same intentional category. Teach is doubled. Teach is composite. Teach is a walking, talking violation of the one body, one crown system. And those fruits? They're not just powers, they're crowns. The Yami Yami no Mi is dominion over gravity and absence, the ability to drag everything into his orbit and erase it. That's a metaphysical crown, king of shadows, king of inevitability. Then he rips the Gura Gura no Mi off Whitebeard's corpse. The most world government is terrified of this fruit in existence. That's the physical crown, king of earthquakes, king of the literal world shaking. So when Oda stacks those on the same head, he's crowning a two-headed king, a sovereign of void and matter, of unseen pull and visible destruction. Grotesque, yes. Unnatural, absolutely. But also, in terms of raw storytelling symmetry, complete. He's the only character monstrous enough to plausibly sit on the world's false throne and not be dwarfed by it, which raises a worse question you're not going to enjoy. If Teach is the fully armed two-crowned king of this system, then what kind of power would you need to overthrow a king who exists in two realities at once? You don't beat a two-crowned king by crowning a third one. You beat him by bringing in someone who refuses the job on a cellular level. And this is where we need to talk about Luffy's whole anti-king philosophy, because the community keeps trying to shove a crown on a guy who keeps drop-kicking it into the ocean. Luffy has been aggressively uninterested in formal leadership from day one. He doesn't run a crew, he hangs out with friends. When the Grand Fleet swears themselves to him, that entire boss ceremony, he literally says no. He tells them he doesn't want to be their leader, that they can do what they want. And Oda even frames it as this ominous foreshadowing. Destiny is creating a fleet around a captain who ideologically rejects being a commander. That's not a quirky gag. That's planned characterization. Same pattern at the Reverie. Everyone is talking politics, kings and votes and power blocks. And where is Luffy in that conversation? He's not. He's the guy whose representatives are Vivi and the others, while he is off punching celestial dragons and declaring war on flags because his friend is crying. He does not care about subjects. He cares about specific people. That's a fundamentally different category of leader. Here's the thing. Even the way he talks about Pirate King is anti-monarch. He never frames it as ruling the seas. And for him, Pirate King is the freest man on the sea. Not the richest, not the strongest navy, not the guy with the most subjects. The world treats kingship as control. Luffy treats his dream as the total absence of control over him. Those concepts do not reconcile without breaking the system. And when he topples actual kings, he ghosts. Dressrosa is the cleanest example. He destroys Doflamingo, liberates an entire country, and then what? He doesn't sit on a throne, he doesn't write a constitution, he doesn't even stay for the after-party paperwork. He hands the reins to Riku and Viola, people who actually want to govern, and sails away. Wano is the same storytelling pattern, just scaled up. He beats Kaido, triggers a national revolution, and then immediately shoves Momonosuke and Yamato into the future of this country slot. Luffy's role is surgical. Break the chains, bounce. I need you to see how intentional this repetition is. Oda is hammering a point with a mallet. So listen to me. Luffy is a catalyst, not a king. He is the author's wrecking ball, not the architect of a nicer palace. This is not a sin. This is normal for a shonen protagonist whose dream is structurally incompatible with the world's current hierarchy, which circles us back to the thesis. If the story needs a rightful king of the old world in order to fully expose and then overthrow that world, it cannot be Luffy by design. The system needs its perfect, monstrous heir first. And that vacancy, narratively, has Blackbeard's name carved into it in big, ugly letters. The question is, how much evidence has Oda already planted that Teach, not Luffy, is the one the old world has been waiting for? So let's pull the receipts, because I need you to see how early Oda starts quietly crowning this man. We're going exhibit by exhibit, courtroom drama style, and we're going to sort them into foreshadowing, pre-writing, and retrofit. This is where the Blackbeard is the rightful king of the old world thing stops being a hot take and starts being the boring default read. Exhibit A, Jaya, the tavern scene. Luffy and Zoro getting clowned on by Bellamy, walking out in silence, and then this weird, scruffy nobody at the counter suddenly turns into a prophet. A man's dream never ends. That speech is usually reserved for heroes aligned with the series' core ideology, and Oda hands it to Teach. Then he hits us with the twin panel, they are the same, he is the same structure. At the time, fans went pattern-seeking monkey and saw Jesus in toast. In hindsight, this is genuine foreshadowing of an intentional rival king. The author is telling you, this man shares the same dream category as Luffy. He just serves a different throne. Exhibit B, Drum Island Aftermath. Blackbeard sacks Drum off screen, wipes out Wapole, and vanishes before the Straw Hats arrive. On first read, this feels random. A scary name. A burned flag. Move on. But then you realise what he actually did. Toppled a corrupt monarch and left a power vacuum that Dalton fills. That's state-level regime change, not treasure hunting. Here's the thing. That's pre-writing. Oda is already writing Teach as a force that rearranges countries, but he hasn't locked every detail of the endgame yet. The action is loaded, flexible, but still clearly operating at a kings and kingdoms scale. Exhibit C, Ace's Hunt. When Ace catches up, he doesn't treat Teach as a mere traitor. He frames him as a once-in-a-generation anomaly, someone worth breaking Whitebeard's rules and the world government's balance over. Their dialogue leans hard into destiny and timing. Teach waited decades on Whitebeard's ship for his moment, then moves the second fate hands him the yami-yami. That is not how you write a mid-boss. That is how you write a pre-written rival heir. I'd call this hybrid, pre-writing with targeted foreshadowing of an inherited will on the wrong side. Exhibit D, the first bounty reveal at Jaya's end. Luffy's 100 million goes up, everyone gasps, and Oda cuts to Blackbeard staring at the poster, grinning, ordering his crew to move. The entire framing is, the board has changed. The real players enter. In retrospect, this one leans retrofit. The emphasis on world-scale ambition gets heavier later, but the scene is still intentionally staging Teach as someone who responds to global signals, not local opportunities. Run these together and you get a pattern. Destiny language, obsession with timing, actions that topple or claim kingdoms. Visuals that frame teach parallel to Luffy instead of beneath him. By Marineford, when Blackbeard steals Whitebeard's fruit and declares his new era, Oda isn't upgrading a side character, he's cashing in years of receipts that he is the rightful king of the old system. And if that's the case, then we need to talk about what kind of king he actually is, and what throne he's being groomed to sit on, But before we sprint off into Teach is the rightful king territory, we need to slam the brakes for a second. Because there is a very real chance that right now you are watching this and going, okay, but aren't you just seeing Jesus in toast? And listen to me, that is a fair question. Humans are pattern-seeking monkeys. We see faces in power outlets, conspiracies in grocery store layouts, destiny in our Spotify shuffle. You give a One Piece fan 3 panels and a half-remembered SBS, and suddenly it's Oda foreshadowed this in Chapter 3 when Luffy blinked twice. This is normal. This is fine. Our brains are built to overfit. So yes, in theory, I could sit down tomorrow and make a Buggy is the rightful king of the world video. I could zoom in on the cross-shaped nose, talk about his D-shaped shoes, pull every gag panel, where he's on a throne of trash, and present it as a grand political allegory. If I cherry-pick hard enough, I can crown Mr. Chop Chop as Joy Boy's landlord. That's the problem when you don't police categories. Here's the thing. That kind of toast reading is exactly what I'm trying not to do. So I need you to notice the guardrails I'm putting up. I'm not just screenshot mining Teach on a chair and calling it foreshadowing. I'm using the same framework I used earlier in the video. Intention, consistency, escalation. Is this detail something an author could have reasonably planned? Does it repeat across time? Does it grow in narrative weight instead of staying a one-off gag? When Oda tells us in interviews that he knew the ending, knew the core mysteries, knew the major rival figures before Chapter 1, that changes the probability math. A random throne panel in a weekly improv comic is pareidolia, a throne motif that recurs from Jaya to Marineford to Hachinosu. In a series the author openly pre-wrote is a different category. And Blackbeard's kingship signals are not living in one corner of the story. They're everywhere. They're in the manga spreads, where he's literally framed above his crew, arms spread, composition screaming, coronation. They're in the dialogue from A Man's Dream Never Ends in Jaya to his new era declaration at Marineford. They're in the political structure, where Teach behaves not as a pirate gremlin, but as a rival sovereign, seizing Whitebeard's territories, attacking kingdoms, bargaining with the world government. Then you have the meta layer, SBS comments, where Oda nudges Teach as a special case, the only man with two fruits, the walking violation of natural law, visual, dialogue, politics, author commentary, multiple mediums, multiple narrative levels, all pushing the same direction. At some point, we're not seeing Jesus in toast. We're reading a menu that says Toast Jesus Special in 7.2 point font. So no, this isn't just pattern chasing for the dopamine hit of feeling smart. This is recognizing a sustained authorial project to build a dark, fully credentialed sovereign to stand opposite Luffy's anti-king. And if Oda has spent decades constructing that rival crown, then the real question isn't, are we imagining it? It's what specific throne has he built for Blackbeard to steal? So if Oda has built a rival crown, we need to talk about the one moment where the story literally updates the pirate world's leaderboard and quietly writes Teach in permanent ink. Because the Yonko system is not just a power scaling meme, it's constitutional law for pirates. 4 emperors of the sea, 4 de facto kings, each ruling a loose federation of crews and islands, in a tense equilibrium with each other and the world government. You don't get that title because you punched hard once. You get it because the entire ecosystem now orbits you. That's the category shift. And here's the thing. Oda spends hundreds of chapters making that structure feel sacred. Whitebeard as the man closest to One Piece. Shanks as the mysterious peacekeeper. Big Mum and Kaido as immovable calamities. The Yonko are the ceiling. They are the final boss slot in the pirate UI. But when one of those portraits changes, that's not flavor text. That is a coronation. Now track how violently Blackbeard speedruns that ladder. This man goes from anonymous weirdo on Jaya to Shichibukai via the ace capture stunt, to kill Whitebeard, steal his fruit, carve up his territory, to officially being named a Yonko in 2 years in a universe? Compare that to Big Mom and Kaido, who have decades of tenure, or even Shanks, whose reputation is built over the entire Great Pirate era. Teach is the only one who treats the world's highest pirate titles as stepping stones on a planned route. And Oda does not play this as a casual update. The newspapers scream it. The narration boxes slow down. We cut to reactions all over the map. Marines sweating, pirates shocked, ordinary citizens realizing the balance has shifted again. This isn't, oh, a new warlord got hired. This is one of the 4 pillars holding up the current age has been replaced by a man with a hole in his flag and a hole in his soul. I need you to notice how formal that sequence feels. The name Yonko Blackbeard lands in the story with the weight of a royal decree. Within pirate society, this is the closest thing to an actual crown before Laugh Tale. You don't need a ceremony with trumpets. In One Piece, the headline is the coronation. The world's consensus is the crown. So when fans hand-wave that as, oh, power creep, this is normal. No, this is not a sin, but it is a misread. Oda is very intentional here. By giving Teach that title, he's saying, structurally, in the pirate hierarchy, there are now exactly 2 people whose claims to the eventual throne are fully credentialed. Luffy, the upstart emperor of freedom. Teach, the emperor who stole his way into the club and then stole a dead king's land. Listen to me. That Yonko reshuffle is Oda's way of legally recognizing Blackbeard as Luffy's only true peer. Everyone else is a warlord, a relic, or a guardian of the old order, which sets up the next problem. If the pirate world just crowned its dark king, what throne is he actually walking toward? What throne is he walking toward? Not away from the system, straight into the center of it. Here's the thing. Blackbeard's whole career is him treating the world government not as an enemy to overthrow, but as an institution to hijack. He doesn't stand outside the castle throwing rocks. He walks in through the front gate wearing a borrowed uniform, raids the pantry, then sets up his own banner over the dining hall. That's not rebellion. That's succession. Run the tape. Teach turns in ace and becomes a Shichibukai, smiling for the cameras while Sengoku grits his teeth. He uses that title as a legal passport to impel down, strolls into the world's most secure prison with government authorization, and then detonates the place for parts. He walks out with a custom roster of level 6 monsters, discards the Shichibukai status the second it's done its job, and sails to Marineford to loot the battlefield. This is planned, intentional parasitism on the existing machinery of rule. Bear that to Luffy. Luffy's relationship to the government is punch first, forget they exist second. He refuses every Shichibukai offer, punches celestial dragons, burns flags. He does not negotiate, he does not cooperate, he does not use their courts or titles. Luffy is the guy who won't even fill out a form. Teach is the guy who reads the fine print and then weaponizes the loopholes. One is a revolutionary in spirit, the other is a crown prince doing court politics. I need you to notice how targeted Teach's moves are. Impel down is not random carnage. It's a draft. Marineford is not chaos. It's a hostile acquisition. Every time the government's attention is elsewhere, Blackbeard is there snatching territories, former Whitebeard Islands, whatever falls into the vacuum. He's not chasing treasure. He's building a state. The community keeps treating him as a wild card. But the pattern is too clean for a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. This is statecraft, and this is where the replacement king category matters. A real usurper doesn't burn the tax office. He takes it over. You keep the prisons, the ports, the trade routes, the fear. You just swap the face on the wanted posters. Teach's crew are former prisoners, former subordinates of the old era, welded into a new hierarchy under his flag. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is textbook foreshadowing of someone who intends to inherit the world, not blow it up. Which brings us to the empty throne. The whole point of that symbol is no king rules this world, while Imu quietly proves that's a lie. But Blackbeard's moves tell you he's not trying to live outside that lie. He's aiming for the real chair behind it. We need to stop reading him as a pirate who hates the system and start reading him as the only pirate who actually understands how it works. Because once you see that, a much uglier question opens up. On what basis does he think he deserves that chair in the first place? Here's the thing. That question only makes sense if you've been trained by Kaido. Kaido teaches you to read King as strongest monster on the board who wants a cool death. Blackbeard forces you to throw that definition out and admit the story has been building a different category of king entirely. Look at Kaido's arc. His dream is a glorious war, a proper death, an ending worthy of a legend who's bored of peacetime. That's romantic in a very dumb, very metal way. But it's also incredibly small and personal midlife crisis. He wants to turn one closed country into his graveyard stage. That's not a world thesis. That's a guy turning his bedroom into a war museum because he never processed his trauma. And when Luffy beats him, huge, spectacular, necessary. But notice what doesn't happen. The Gorosei don't panic about the throne. The reverie system doesn't even blink. The world government structure stays intact. The Yonko balance just shuffles. Kaido's fall is regime change, not paradigm change. You topple a tyrant, you do not touch the operating system. Now contrast that with Teach. I need you to zoom out and actually look at his targets. He doesn't just bully one country. He hunts institutions. He takes Whitebeard's fruit at Marineford in front of the entire world and uses it to annihilate the era that fruit symbolized. He raids Impel Down, breaks the prison that underwrites Marine Authority, and turns its worst monsters into his personal army. He attacks kingdoms, seizes ex-Whitebeard territories, and negotiates with the world government as a sovereign, not a criminal. This is not a guy chasing a good death. This is a guy editing the map, and you can feel Oda telegraphing that difference in the writing. Kaido is framed as the world's strongest creature, the ultimate raid boss. Blackbeard is framed as the man who will shake the world, the one whose existence forces a new configuration. One is a wall. The other is an architect. The community keeps treating them as the same category of villain, and that's the problem. Listen to me. Kaido is a fake final boss. Intentionally. He is the gigantic, beautifully animated obstacle Oda throws at you to satisfy the strongest enemy yet quota before he pulls the real thematic trigger. Beating Kaido proves Luffy can take down any single monster. It does not prove he can confront a rival king who understands the system and wants the same chair. That's Teach. He goes after the Yonko title, the Pirate King title, and by extension, the myth of the empty throne itself. He is the only villain whose defeat would symbolically dethrone the old world's rightful king. The hidden sovereign ideology that says power belongs to those chosen by fate, blood, and fear. When Luffy beats Blackbeard, he isn't just winning a fight, he's invalidating that claim and installing a new paradigm of what a king even is. Which raises the uncomfortable next step. On what basis can Teach argue that he, not Luffy? Here's the thing. Once you ask on what basis Teach can claim kingship, you can't just stay in Jaya and Marineford nostalgia. You have to follow him into the late game, where Oda stops hinting and starts filing paperwork. I need you to look at these moves not as random villain chaos, but as a coronation tour. Start with Hachinosu. Blackbeard doesn't just have a base. He has a pirate kingdom with its own culture, currency, and succession rules. The Rocky Port incident? That's not just a cool lore nugget. That's Teach removing Wang Zhe and installing himself as the sovereign of Pirate Island. Politically, he's claiming a de facto independent state outside world government control, complete with a fleet and vassals. This feels pure pre-writing. The man who once had no ship now rules the dark mirror of Laugh Tale, an intentional anti-Raftel capital that Oda has been gesturing towards since Pirates Paradise was first name-dropped. Then runs Sphinx through the same filter. Blackbeard's crew invades Whitebeard's homeland, threatens civilians, and tries to extort a former Yonko's legacy territory. That's not petty revenge. That's a dynastic overwrite. He's saying, the age of Whitebeard is over, and his lands are mine by right of conquest. The Marines showing up afterward to clean up only underline the point. The world's official powers are now reacting to Teach, the way they react to actual nations, not freelance pirates. This one reads more retrofit to me in the good sense. Oda sees how far Teach's claim has evolved and retroactively strengthens his kingship by having him go after symbolic inheritance, not just loot. Now look at his dealings with former Shichibukai, kidnapping Kobe, bargaining with the Marines, and trying to trade a sword member for official recognition of Hachinosu as a lawful kingdom. Listen to me. That is textbook usurper behavior. He's not content being a feared outlaw. He wants his throne notarized. The political implication is brutal and simple. Blackbeard believes his power is so undeniable that the world government will eventually have to acknowledge his sovereignty on paper. That negotiation scene is Oda cashing in long-term pre-writing about Teach as the man who weaponizes institutions instead of just breaking them. And then there's Amazon Lily, attacking a sovereign state, capturing citizens, and forcing the navy and the former Shichibukai into a three-way standoff is not random villainy. It's a stress test of world order. Who yields? Who negotiates? Who blinks? The fact that Teach walks away with prisoners and leverage while the Marines retreat tells you everything about how other powers now vote on his status. They treat him as a rival king whose whims must be managed, not a nuisance to be erased. Notice the escalation curve. Early Teach is personal. Kill Thatch, betray Whitebeard, chase a fruit. Mid Teach is local. Sees Hachinosu raid specific islands. Late Teach is global, bargaining at the level of kingdoms, Shichibukai, and marine command structures. That's the trajectory of a usurper, consolidating power step by step until the only remaining question is which throne he's actually aiming at. At this stage, calling Blackbeard anything less than a rival king isn't interpretation, it's willful blindness to the text. And if the community is still in denial, that's only because we haven't talked about the one move that quietly puts him in direct competition with the empty throne itself. And this is where the community completely faceplants, because somewhere along the way Pirate King stopped being a job and turned into a BuzzFeed quiz result. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The default fandom take is Pirate King equals the main character with the biggest heart, the guy who smiles the widest, protects his friends the hardest, says freedom the loudest. It's treated as a Hogwarts house. You're Gryffindor Pirate King, your friend is Hufflepuff Fleet Admiral, and we all go home feeling spiritually sorted. Here's the thing, this is not a sin. This is not bad reading. This is in fact how most of us first encounter stories. We imprint on the protagonist, we map our values onto them, and then we assume the crown is a moral trophy. Luffy is the nicest, funniest, most thematically aligned with freedom, therefore he must be the rightful king. Case closed, video over, roll credits. Except, no. I need you to slow down and actually listen to the text for a second. Inside the story, the people who actually understand what Pirate King means do not talk about it as a feel-good destiny badge. Shanks isn't tearing up on that cliff because his goofy rubber intern has the right Myers-Briggs type. Whitebeard doesn't clash with Roger and then frame that man's title as a world-shaking miracle because he passed the vibe check. These are monsters of the sea, old guard emperors, treating Pirate King as a geopolitical singularity, and Whitebeard protects Ace's execution site. The Marines aren't panicking over guy with big heart energy. They're panicking over the potential return of Roger's throne. Sengoku spells it out. That title almost broke the world. Shanks walking into Marineford halts a war not because he's cool, but because everyone in that bay understands the historical weight of the man whose ship he once sailed on. But in fandom discourse, all that structural context gets flattened into personality aesthetics. We reduce a hard political category to who embodies freedom better, and then we call it foreshadowing when the author keeps saying Luffy will be Pirate King. We treat the world's rigged criteria as if it's a cosmic sorting hat whispering your special into the protagonist's ear. Pattern interrupt. What if the story is saying the opposite? What if the entire point is that the world's own criteria for kingship are broken, and Luffy is not the correct answer to that test? Once you stop treating kingship as a personality quiz, you start noticing the other candidate Oda has been methodically building who does fit the old system's requirements. The one who seizes territories, manipulates institutions, weaponizes inherited will, and plays by the cruel rules Roger's era left behind. In other words, you finally understand why Oda needs Blackbeard. We need to upgrade our reading. Stop asking who do I want to be Pirate King, and start asking, according to this world's corrupt intentional design, who actually qualifies. Because when you follow that thread, the throne stops belonging to your favorite character and starts belonging to the monster the system was always built to crown. And once you see that, Teach's moves toward the empty throne stop being random villain grind and start reading as a planned coronation attempt. So if the system is built to crown a monster, we need to talk about the most uncomfortable inheritance in the story, Whitebeard's throne. Because the community has this very cozy headcanon where Ace was the real heir and Teach is just the rat who snuck in through the floorboards. And listen to me, emotionally I get it. In terms of writing, that's not what Oda actually did. From Marineford onward, Ace is framed as Whitebeard's son, full stop. The crew calls him that. The war is literally fought to save the sun. You get that execution platform tableau where Sengoku announces the son of Roger, but narratively, Ace's heart belongs to Newgate. He's the emotional successor, the kid who wanted to give this old man a family instead of a crown. If you only read on vibes, you walk away thinking, Ace was supposed to be the next Whitebeard, fate just robbed him. This is normal, this is fine. Except here's the thing, Oda doesn't just kill Ace, he kills Ace, and then has Whitebeard die on his feet, declaring that Roger's treasure is real, while the world watches the strongest man fall. That's not just a death, that's a deliberate demolition of a political position. Territories go ownerless, crews lose their North Star. The category of Sea King, the man whose name alone holds an era together, suddenly becomes vacant. There is a literal and mythic power vacuum stamped into the story, and into that vacuum walks Teach. Not metaphorically, physically. He steals Whitebeard's fruit off the still warm corpse in one of the most grotesque planned pieces of visual foreshadowing Oda's ever done. He sails out of Marineford already upgraded, already boasting that his era has begun. Then in the time skip, what does he do? He hunts down Whitebeard remnants, wipes out Marco's forces, and carves up the old territories. The world starts recognizing him as a Yonko, specifically in the slot Whitebeard left open. On paper, in terms of raw succession mechanics, Teach is the one who actually inherits. He takes the body, the weapon, the turf, and the title. Ace had the love. Teach gets the ledger. It's a parasitic inheritance, sure, but it's still inheritance. The author is very intentionally showing you that in this world, the king position doesn't care whether the heir is beloved. It cares who can seize and hold the chair. That's the difference between symbolic son and functional successor. I need you to notice how consistent this pattern is. Every time an old king falls, Teach is the one who ends up with their cheat codes. Whitebeard's quake power, Whitebeard sees. Whitebeard's narrative job as the looming wall in front of the final era. It's succession by looting, which then loops us right back into the broader thesis. This isn't random villain grind. This is Oda pre-writing Teach as the designated heir to every decaying throne. And if he's already inherited Whitebeard's kingdom, the question becomes terrifyingly simple. Whose kingdom is he quietly lining up to steal next? So when I say whose kingdom is he stealing next, I'm not just talking geopolitics. I'm talking myth. I'm talking about the crown that sits over the entire story's soul. Because here's the thing, Oda didn't just give Luffy a silly Toon Force power-up. He retconned the entire protagonist into a mythic office. Joy Boy, Sun God Nika, a liberator whose job description is joy, freedom, drums of liberation, and the literal sun. The fruit isn't the Gomu Gomu no Mi, it's a Zoan model of a god whose whole brand is breaking chains and making people laugh while the world government has a collective aneurysm. Joy Boy fails in the Void Century. Nika disappears. That promise hangs over the story as this unresolved, intentionally planned role that needs a new actor. Luffy's awakening is the moment the author cashes that check. He's not just a pirate with rubber powers. He's the reincarnated idea of freedom itself. Now, in a normal story, you crown a sun god and call it a day. But Oda is a pattern-obsessed gremlin. And in myth, when you get a sun god, you very often get a shadow. You get an underworld ruler, a dark king, a lord of the dead. Ra gets Osiris, Apollo gets Hades. The bright sky needs a chthonic opposite so the cosmology doesn't tip over. Light implies darkness. Liberation implies dominion. We need to talk about that symmetry because the community keeps almost getting there and then backing off. You've seen the Dark Joy Boy theories, the anti-Nika edits, the posts that slap Blackbeard's grin over Luffy's Gear 5 panel and go, whoa, parallels, and then they stop. They treat it as an aesthetic meme instead of a structural category. Listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal pattern-seeking monkey behavior, but if we're going to be pattern-seeking monkeys, we might as well commit and ask the uncomfortable question, what does it actually mean in story for there to be a Dark King opposite Joy Boy? Blackbeard is the answer Oda has been quietly writing toward. Not as a literal dark god, but as the mythic shadow of Joy Boy's office. AD, who looks at the same chosen status and goes, cool, I'm going to use this to rule. Where Luffy's Nika is about freeing slaves in Mariojo, Teacher's Yami is about dragging everything into his gravity well. Two devil fruits, two eras stapled together. A man who weaponizes fate and timing instead of rebelling against them. I need you to notice the ideological foreshadowing here. Jaya Teach gives the man's dream never ends speech, echoing the series' core philosophy, but then spends the rest of the story turning that dream into personal dominion. He's already acting as a king of the Dark Ocean, seizing islands, bargaining with the government, sitting on his own grotesque version of a throne. But what is Oda actually building toward? A final confrontation with the rightful king of the old, hidden underground world, the accumulated darkness of the Void Century, the pirates, the celestial dragon's sins, stands in front of a Joybringer who fundamentally does not want a crown. The Dark King saying this world needs a ruler, and Nika saying no, it needs to dance. And when those two positions collide, the world doesn't just get a winner. It has to choose what king even means and who that word really belongs to, which is where the empty throne, Imu, and the most rigged coronation in history quietly walk onto the stage. And if Imu and the empty throne are the rigged coronation, then we need to talk about the guy Oda has been quietly bubble wrapping in the author comments for 25 years. Listen to me. The way Oda talks about Blackbeard in SBS and databooks does not match how he talks about anyone else. Not Shanks, not Mihawk, not even Dragon. There's a whole separate category of I know the answer but I refuse to tell you yet that basically has Teacher's face printed on the folder. Let's start with the body weirdness. Early SBS, a kid asks about Blackbeard never sleeping. Oda doesn't go, haha, he's just built different. He goes coy, gives that non-answer about how there are people like that in the world, then pivots away before you can pin him down. Same thing when fans point out the Jaya panel where Blackbeard's teeth change between shots. Any other character, Oda laughs it off as a drawing mistake. For Teach, he drops the there might be some deeper meaning line and then slams the door. This is not a sin. This is not some crime against transparency. This is what an author does when the payoff is hardwired into the endgame outline and he cannot afford to improvise on camera. He's not spitballing, he's protecting. Then you hit the data books. Oh, read how they talk about random supernovas, dangerous rookie, troublesome, unpredictable. Now read Blackbeard's entries. The man who plunged the world into chaos. The greatest obstacle in front of the Pirate King. Its bounty blurbs are framed less as numbers and more as, yeah, this is the guy who breaks the error. That's not just power scaling. That's coronation language. Here's the thing. Data books are where Oda is usually willing to over-explain. He'll tell you kids' favourite food, Law's blood type, the exact height of a shipmast no human being needed to know. But when it comes to teach, suddenly it's all ominous epithets and redacted vibes. A mysterious man bearing the will of D. A body that is abnormal even in this world. Statement, then spooky restatement with the key term. And when fans push harder in SBS, the pattern gets louder. Ask about Zoro's scar? He jokes. Ask about Sanji's eyebrows? He jokes, then casually foreshadows Germa. Ask about Blackbeard's darkness fruit, his flag, his weird Jolly Roger with 3 skulls. Stonewall. That's important, I can't say yet. How many times does an author have to literally say, I can't tell you, that's for later, before we admit this was planned? I need you to recognize what that coyness actually is. It's pre-writing protection. It's the behavior of someone who already knows why this man can hold 2 fruits, what his relationship to the D and the throne is, and how that intersects with Imu Dijia, and is just drip-feeding the minimum necessary to keep the mystery burning. Fans in this community love to meme Oda planned this 20 years ago whenever 2 panels rhyme by accident. This is the opposite problem. Here, the author is practically screaming, yes, this one is intentional, and we shrug it off as quirky trivia. Blackbeard's kingship isn't a late-game whim. The paratext has been treating him as a narrative keystone since he was a shadow in Ace's backstory, which raises a nastier question. If Oda's been guarding Teach's secrets that hard on the margins, what does that say about his role when the empty throne finally gets a real occupant? So let's go back to that throne, because this is where the community quietly loses the plot. The empty throne is sold to us as this beautiful symbolic promise. No single king, all nations equal, the world governed by consensus. And then Oda immediately breaks the toy in front of you. Imu walks up, sits on the empty seat, and the manga just casually tells you, oh, by the way, there has always been a king. Functionally, Imu is the hidden monarch, the secret author of history. They control the Gorosei, erase islands, reorder wanted posters, and decide which bloodlines get to keep existing. This is not a vague thematic evil. This is bureaucratic godhood. It is spreadsheets, genocide, and PR management fused into one immortal problem. Now compare that to Luffy's lane. Luffy punches tyrants. He frees islands. He drags celestial dragons through the mud because they're cruel, not because he's trying to file a new government structure. His entire storytelling category of conflict is personal and moral, not institutional. He does not care who sits in which chair in a room he will never voluntarily enter. He cares who is starving on the street outside. Here's the thing. That means Luffy's path doesn't naturally curve toward the empty throne in a political sense. He is going to collide with Imu as a byproduct of freeing Fishman Island, Alabasta, Wano, whatever the final chain is. But his dream is not become the new secret monarch of the world. His dream is be so free that kings stop mattering. This is fine. This is normal. That is exactly what Joy Boy energy is supposed to be. Teach is the one moving as a rival sovereign. He doesn't just chase treasure. He seizes kingdoms. He topples Whitebeard, immediately claims his territories, then starts shopping for ancient weapons and Void Century intel. Hachinosu is not a hideout. It is a capital. When Blackbeard attacks kingdoms and negotiates with the world government, he is operating on Imu's layer of the board, not Luffy's. And if you track the foreshadowing, it's planned. He is a D, explicitly framed by Ace and Jaya's narration as someone chosen by timing and fate. He steals not one but 2 devil fruits, becoming this visually crowned 2-headed monster in Oda's spreads. That's not random edgelord energy. That is coronation imagery for a creature designed to sit on an unnatural throne. So what does a plausible endgame look like? I need you to entertain 3 options. 1. Teach tries to ally with Imu, a devil striking a bargain with a god, both intending to backstab the other once the dust settles. 2. He replaces the world government outright, using ancient weapons or Uranus-level leverage to force the Gorosei to bow. 3. He overthrows Imu themselves, the usurper of an already stolen seat, and crowns himself the hidden king. In every version, the final war stops being Luffy versus Blackbeard in a vacuum. It becomes Joy Boy versus the rightful king of the old world, with Imu as the current squatter, and Teach as the only character ambitious and monstrous enough to claim that same crown on purpose. And listen to me. Oda has already told you which of those 3 paths Blackbeard prefers. He just didn't say it in words. So, quick breather. We've been sprinting through crowns and conspiracies, and I need you to know where we actually are in this argument before we dive back into the chaos. The core claim hasn't changed. Blackbeard is the rightful king of the existing One Piece world order. Not morally rightful, not our boy, but structurally rightful. He's the heir to how this system already works. Luffy is not the king of that world. Luffy is the liberator who's going to burn that world down and then stand on the ashes. To get there, we built a framework. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, pre-writing. Foreshadowing, intentional setup for a payoff the author already knows. Retrofitting, assigning new meaning later. This is not a sin, this is normal. And then pre-writing. Oda deciding the big endpoints. Joy Boy, Imu, the D, the final king pieces, before chapter 1 and then just revealing them out of order. We ran that framework across Blackbeard's whole career, early, mid, late. Early Teach in Jaya and Drum, mid-Teach during the Whitebeard betrayal and the Yonko reshuffle, late Teach in the post-time skip era, moving like a sovereign on a world map. The question every time was, is this foreshadowing of a planned kingship, a retrofit, or a coincidence? We're hallucinating because we're pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. So what are the big pillars we actually have on the table? First, the Jaya Bar scene. A man's dream never ends. Oda hands Blackbeard a thesis statement that usually belongs to heroes, then frames him as Luffy's ideological mirror. That's not random. That's the author quietly putting him in the same destiny category. Second, the D lineage framing. Teach isn't just a pirate with ambitions. He's a D who explicitly talks about fate and timing, who moves when the era shifts, who steals the Yami and Gura to become a walking natural disaster. That's not just power scaling. That's a king candidate being built in slow motion. Third, the throne and crown imagery. Blackbeard sitting above his crew, looming over conquered islands, the Yonko title reshuffled to place him as Whitebeard's successor. Then we cut to Marie-Edgeois, to the empty throne, this fake symbol of no king, and Oda keeps rhyming that silhouette with the way he frames Teach. Every single week, here's the thing, when the story keeps showing you a chair and the same guy reaching for it, that's intentional. Fourth, Teach's political behaviour. He doesn't just chase treasure, he seizes kingdoms, trades with the world government, times his moves around the reverie. He behaves as a rival sovereign, not a chaotic raider. Now, are all of these perfectly, provably pre-written from day one? No, we need to be honest. Some of this is almost certainly retrofit. Some of it is Oda discovering sharper angles on a character he already planned as Luffy's dark twin. This is fine. The problem isn't that we can't timestamp every decision. The problem is pretending the pattern isn't there when it keeps repeating across decades, across arcs, across visual language. From here, we're going to zoom out even harder. We're going to poke at the community's Oda discourse, ask what this king versus liberator framing actually does to the final war, and crucially, figure out how to praise the craft without turning Oda into an omniscient god planner who foresaw your Reddit theory in 1997. Because if Blackbeard really is the rightful king of the old world, then the question isn't, does Luffy beat him? It's, what does it mean to overthrow a king the story itself has spent 25 years crowning? And here's where the community quietly loses its mind. We don't just want Oda to be good at writing. We want him to be a time god with a corkboard in 1997 that already had Gear 5, Imu, and Blackbeard's two fruits circled in red string. Because if there was always a master plan, then every reread is a treasure hunt, and every panel you screenshot on Twitter is proof you were smart enough to see the real story. That feeling? That's crack for pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. Listen to me. This is not a sin. This is normal. Stories are safer and more meaningful when you can tell yourself, it was all intentional. If Luffy was always the destined rightful king, then you didn't just get lucky that your favourite rubber boy won the narrative lottery. You were chosen to witness the prophecy. You're not just reading a manga, you're deciphering scripture. Here's the thing. Once you buy into that, your memory stops being a camera and starts being an editor. You remember Jaya's "man's dreams never end" as Luffy's ethos, but you quietly forget that Oda hands that exact line to Blackbeard first, framed dead center in a spread, drinking and preaching about fate. You remember every panel where Shanks and Rayleigh talk about Luffy's destiny, and skip over the panels where Ace is literally told Teach is the real danger, the one hunting his own era. That selective memory doing PR for your preferred king. You file every inherited will speech under Luffy foreshadowing and toss Blackbeard's D initial into the miscellaneous bin. You see Nika silhouettes behind Luffy and call it planned, but when Blackbeard starts moving like a rival sovereign, seizing kingdoms and building a fleet, you downgrade it to Oda decided to upgrade him later. Convenient. I need you to understand how that erases the actual craft. Oda's genius is not a 1000, a spreadsheet where every eyebrow hair was fixed in 1997. The genius is pre-writing the big categories, Void Century, Will of D, the man who rules the sea, and then adapting, retrofitting, and escalating as he goes. He doesn't need to know every Blackbeard scene from day one to have always known, in broad strokes, that there would be a Dark King candidate whose claim rivals Luffy's. Pattern interrupt. If you demand omniscient planning, you can't actually see Blackbeard, because now, anytime his early setup doesn't scream final boss in neon, you call it improv. Jaya? Just a gag. Drum? Random traitor. Ace's entire hunt? Side quest. And if he's a late game add-on, then his legitimacy as rightful king automatically drops. He's not the crowned rival of the old world. He's DLC. We need to move to a healthier appreciation, valuing how Oda's flexible enough to crown a villain as the rightful king of the old world, to let the narrative slowly recognize Teacher's claim, even if Chapter 1 didn't ship with a Blackbeard coronation ceremony. Because once you accept that, you can finally ask the real question. What has Oda actually been doing, visually and thematically, to crown Blackbeard while you were busy polishing Luffy's halo? Or we need to actually define the exam before we grade the papers. Everyone in the community keeps screaming rightful king, as if that's a real objective category, but no one writes down the rubric. So, listen to me. Let's be annoying nerds for a second and formalize what this world itself treats as legitimacy. Here's the thing. In One Piece's internal logic, a rightful king isn't about who's nicest. It's about who fits a set of planned narrative criteria the author has been hammering for 25 years. Control of territory, recognition by other powers, inheriting a legacy or will, possessing ultimate power, whether that's the One Piece, ancient weapons, or broken devil fruits. And finally, alignment with the world's dominant ideology, the harsh social Darwinist rulebook that the Celestial Dragons quietly wrote. Run Luffy through that machine. Does he have territory? Sort of. Fishman Island's promise, Wano's gratitude, a grand fleet that swore fealty while he was too busy eating meat to notice. It's emotional sovereignty, not bureaucratic. Recognition, he's a Yonko, but it's a chaotic meme Yonko status granted because he punched Kaido and the newspapers had to cope. He doesn't attend reveries, he breaks them. Legacy, this is where he spikes the test. D Carrier, Roger's spiritual heir, Joy Boy's literal successor. The story's foreshadowing has been screaming chosen around him for decades. But writing-wise, that's mythic legitimacy, not administrative. He doesn't want to rule. He doesn't want a throne. He wants freedom and parties. That's a massive problem if you're grading by the world's rigged standards, because the world wants a manager, not a liberator. Now run Blackbeard through the same categories and try not to see the issue. Territory, he's doing Empire speedrun percent. He steals Whitebeard seas, assaults kingdoms, turns islands into personal hunting grounds. Recognition, the world government has to acknowledge him as Yonko. The Marines treat him as a rival superpower, not a clown. Legacy, he's D as well, but instead of being Roger's spiritual son, he's Whitebeard's parasitic heir. He literally rips the old era's strongest power off the corpse of its greatest symbol. 2 devil fruits, framed as a crowned two-headed monster in panel after panel. That's not subtle foreshadowing. That's Oda drawing ultimate power in 7-2 point font. Pursuit of the One Piece and ancient weapons. Luffy stumbles into world-changing tools while following his heart. Teach hunts them. Strategically. Intentionally. He knows what the throne is and he wants it. And ideology. This is the ugliest part. Blackbeard actually believes in the words core rule. The strong take what they can, the weak lose what they must. He is the logical endpoint of the celestial dragon's worldview, just stripped of hypocrisy. By the system's own disgusting math, he's the correct answer. So when you line them up, point by point, Blackbeard checks more rightful king boxes than Luffy. This is not a sin in the writing, this is the point. Oda is showing you a world where the exam is so cursed that the villain aces it. And I need you to sit with that discomfort because the whole reason Luffy exists is to break the test itself, not to pass it. Which raises the next problem. How do you overthrow a rubric that the entire planet treats as natural law? So here's the thing. Once you accept that the rubric is cursed, the final Luffy versus Blackbeard clash can't just be who punches harder on page 3 of the volume. It has to be a fight over what the word king even means. It has to be a battle where the throne, the flag, and the letter D are all weapons on the field, not just decorations in the background. I need you to picture the structure. First stage, the symbolic coronation. Whether it's Mary Geowise or some ancient ruin tied to Laugh-Tale, Blackbeard gets there first. Maybe he's already sitting on the so-called empty throne. Boots on the steps, flag of the Blackbeard pirates draped over the swords of the 20 kings. This is not subtle foreshadowing. This is the author putting the crown on his head in front of you. He's not just a contender. He's the system's final answer. Then we get the argument. Teach has been rehearsing this speech since Jaya. A man's dream never ends? That wasn't just romantic nonsense. That was his campaign slogan. His case is simple and terrifying. He played the pirate game better than anyone. He seized Whitebeard's power. He seized territories. He seized timing itself. The world needs a strong king. Destiny chose someone with the will of D, who was willing to do what the other Ds wouldn't. In his mind, that's not villainy. That's proof he's the rightful king in this category of storytelling. And listen to me, Oda is going to make that argument feel coherent. The problem is not that Blackbeard is wrong by the world's rules. The problem is that the world's rules are wrong. That's where Luffy comes in. His counter isn't a legal brief, it's a demolition plan. Any system where the most qualified candidate is a two-fruit warlord who treats people as resources is a system that deserves to be destroyed, not inherited. Luffy doesn't want the throne Blackbeard wants. He wants a world where that throne doesn't exist. Which brings us to Imu and the empty throne. Whether Blackbeard overthrows Imu, partners with them, or storms the room mid-coup, the point is the same. That chair has never really been empty. It's a prop, a a fake symbol of no king in a world built on hidden monarchy. Luffy's job in the final confrontation is not to sit in that chair more nicely. His job is to make it genuinely empty, burn the flag, crack the dais, turn the One Piece throne into rubble the community of the sea can dance on. So the emotional climax? It isn't who wins the crown. It's whether the concept of a rightful king survives at all. Does Blackbeard die proving the rubric was consistent, or does Luffy live long enough to prove the rubric was the joke? And the scary part is, Oda has already shown us one answer in miniature. You just haven't realised which arc was the dress rehearsal yet. And if you still don't know which arc was the dress rehearsal, listen to me, because Oda literally told you in Jaya and you scrolled past it. We need to go back to Mocktown. Luffy just got humiliated by Bellamy's crew. Dreams have been clowned on for 10 straight pages. In the middle of the garbage heap, this sweaty nobody at the bar stands up and drops. People's dreams never end. He rants about the Sky Island, about the great age of piracy, about how fools laugh but the dreamers keep moving. Then Oda hits that famous panel. The three silhouettes at the dock, Luffy, Zoro and Blackbeard, framed as parallel believers, not enemies, yet not allies, just 3 points on the same ideological line. Here's the thing. Oda does not hand that kind of line out cheaply. That man's dream never ends speech sits in the same category as Whitebeard's One Piece does exist, or Roger laughing at Laugh-Tale. These are not random bar monologues. These are the author stepping onto the stage with a sock puppet and telling you the core philosophy of the story, how many characters actually get to speak for the narrative's soul. Maybe half a dozen in 1,000 chapters, and somehow Blackbeard is one of them. The community's usual move is to say, yeah, but he's a hypocrite, as if the author accidentally gave the thesis statement to the wrong guy. This is not a sin. This is normal pattern-seeking monkey behaviour. You see the teeth, the betrayal, the cowardice at Marineford, and you go, oh, that speech was a fake-out. But from Teacher's perspective, he is absolutely living that philosophy. He just defines dream as throne. For Luffy, the dream is freedom, the sea, the feast at the end. For Blackbeard, the dream is dominion, the right to sit where no one else is allowed to sit. That's why he doesn't chase treasure, he chases positions. A Yonko seat, Whitebeard's fruit, entire kingdoms during the Reverie chaos. When he says dreams never end, he's not talking about some abstract self-help poster. He's talking about the endless escalation of power, the way a true king never stops reaching for a higher crown. I need you to see how intentional this is. Oda could have given that line to some random old man in a tavern, or to Shanks, or to Rayleigh in Sabaudi, doing his cool retired uncle speech. Instead, he loads it into Blackbeard, the guy with the D, the guy who moves in perfect narrative timing, the guy who literally breaks the devil fruit rule so hard he's drawn as a two-headed monster. That's not a coincidence. That's planned ideological foreshadowing. So when Teach yells, people's dreams never end, it reads less as a generic shonen motto and more as a mission statement for a rightful king of the old world. A man who believes the sea exists to be ruled, that fate exists to be weaponized, and that his dream of dominion is just as valid as Luffy's dream of freedom. He will chase that throne to the bitter end. And the terrifying question is, what happens when the guy who owns the motto finally reaches the crown room? So here's where I need you to be really honest with yourself for a second. When you hear Blackbeard is the rightful king, does a tiny part of you feel defensive for Luffy? Does it feel like I just walked into your house and told you your dog actually belongs to the neighbour? That reaction is real. That reaction is valid. This is not a sin. Because our community has spent 20 plus years treating future Pirate King as Luffy's personal brand identity. So when I say the author has been quietly building Teach as the structurally legitimate king of this world, it can sound like I'm stealing Luffy's crown and mailing it to a war criminal. But listen to me. It's actually the opposite. Giving Blackbeard full, planned, in-universe legitimacy doesn't downgrade Luffy. It upgrades the rebellion. It means Oda isn't writing a goofy coup against some random clown who lucked into power. He's writing a full-on regicide against the guy, the system, the prophecy, the history books would all point to and say, yeah, that's the one. Here's the thing, it is way more meaningful in any story to overthrow a rightful competent king of a rotten system than to punt a jester off a folding chair. If Teach is the guy whose D, whose timing, whose two-fruit monstrosity all line up with the world's hidden rules, then Luffy beating him isn't just strong guy wins. It's the narrative equivalent of walking into a cathedral, looking at the officially anointed pope and saying, "Cool hat, I'm burning the church down." And suddenly all those Luffy character beats you already love get sharper. His constant rejection of leadership titles, I don't want to be a hero, I don't care about being a boss, all the way to Wano where he refuses to rule over Wano or dress up his freedom as kingship. Those aren't just quirky personality traits, they're the author drawing a hard, intentional line between throne and freedom. Pattern interrupt. Go back to Jaya in your head. Teach delivers the "a man's dream never ends" speech, the kind of ideological foreshadowing Oda usually reserves for allies. At the same time, Luffy is punching Bellamy over dreams, not over power. Same category of rhetoric, totally different application. One man hears dream and thinks crown. The other hears dream and thinks ship. That difference is the story. We need to sit with that tension instead of smoothing it over. Because when Blackbeard is hungry for the throne, attacking kingdoms, moving as a rival sovereign, Luffy's disinterest in ruling stops being generic shonen minimalism and becomes an active refusal of the role the world would hand a man as strong as him. So I need you to hold both truths at once. Luffy is the emotional and thematic king of our hearts. Blackbeard is the rightful king of the world as it has been written, the endpoint of its rigged rules. And the whole point of this final saga is watching one tear the other down, which raises the real question, how do you actually kill a rightful king in a story that's been foreshadowing his coronation from chapter 1? So before we start emotionally sharpening the guillotine, we need to calm down and do something deeply unsexy, an audit. I need you to put away the Oda is a 5D chess god memes for a second and actually count what's going on with Blackbeard. Here's the thing, not every cool parallel is foreshadowing. Some of it is pre-writing, some of it is retrofitting, some of it is just us being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and then write a 3-0 tweet thread about it. So quick tally. True foreshadowing first. Jaya is the cleanest example. Blackbeard's "a man's dream never dies" speech is intentional ideological setup. That is Oda planting a flag that this disgusting swamp goblin shares the same core dream language as Luffy. Ace hunting Teach and calling him dangerous long before Marineford, also foreshadowing. The story explicitly frames Teach as a ticking time bomb the Whitebeard crew failed to defuse, and those are guns on the mantelpiece that absolutely go off. Pre-writing next. Blackbeard being a D, being the dark mirror to Luffy, being a top-tier endgame antagonist. That's pre-writing. Oda has said he knew the big villains and the shape of the ending from the start. The double fruit thing, the weird body, the inherited will conversation around him and Luffy, those feel less. I'll figure this out someday. And more, I already know this guy is the anti-protagonist. I'll reveal the mechanics later. The setup is a fragment of a decision that was already made. Retrofitting? This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. The exact nature of the Yami and Gura combo, the way Blackbeard's fleet is structured, even some of the more recent throne and crown imagery around him, those read as Oda going, "Oh, this visual I used before, I can promote that to full symbolism now." He's assigning extra meaning to earlier choices because the story has finally caught up. And here's where I need you to be honest with me. Did Oda have Teach will steal Whitebeard's fruit at Marineford using a flesh tarp of pirates, scripted in 1997? Probably not. Did he know this guy is the successor to Whitebeard's era, the rightful king of the old world, and I'm going to keep escalating him until he can sit opposite Luffy at the table of gods? Yeah, that's the scaffolding. Compare that to Crocodile, Doflamingo, even Kaido. They get great arcs, some foreshadowing, a bit of retrofitting, but they don't get 20 years of structural positioning, early ideological speech, Will of D status, parallel journey, competing claim to the throne, and a power set that literally eats dead kings. So whether you worship genius planning or think Oda is mostly surfing his own outline, the end result is the same. The story's bones were built so Blackbeard could wear the crown first, which then raises the real craft problem. How do you write a world where the wrong king is structurally right and still let Luffy win without cheating? You solve that craft problem the lazy way by doing what a lot of the community quietly does. You turn Luffy into a narrative auto-win button. He's the chosen one, he's Joy Boy, he's Nika, he's the sun, therefore he wins. Destiny said so, end of discussion. And listen to me, this is not a sin, this is not bad reading, this is in fact how most long shonen end up training you to think. Naruto, Ichigo. By the last arc, the story has basically stapled a pre-approved by fate sticker to their forehead. So when fans roll into every new One Piece conflict, assuming, well, Luffy has to win, he's thematically right, he's structurally rightful, he's the protagonist, this is normal. Here's the thing, once you put Luffy in both categories at the same time, the story's tension quietly evaporates. If he's thematically right, meaning his ideology is the moral North Star, and he's also structurally rightful, meaning the world's systems and prophecies and secret histories all point to him, then the late game stops being a conflict and starts being a coronation. You're not watching a war, you're watching the universe do paperwork. That's why people talk about Wano's ending feeling pre-approved. Gear 5 drops Drums of Liberation, Ancient Prophecy, Giant Sun God Silhouette. The author is screaming, this is the guy. If you import that same mindset wholesale into the final clash and assume Luffy is also the rightful king by the world's own rules, then Blackbeard showing up is just a speed bump. The outcome is a victory lap. The only question is how many cool spreads Oda feels like drawing. But if we treat all that structural foreshadowing we just walked through as pointing to Blackbeard instead, suddenly the category flips. Luffy is still thematically right, but structurally wrong. The world on paper is not built for him. The prophecies, the timing, the man's dream never ends speech, the Will of D framing, the crown imagery, all of that bureaucracy of fate is stamped with Teacher's name. Now when Luffy wins, he's not fulfilling destiny, he's committing treason against it. I need you to sit with how much more dramatic that is. Because now every setback, every near loss, every Marineford style, oh he actually might die here moment stops feeling like fake suspense. If the world's logic is on Blackbeard's side, then when Luffy gets folded, that's not the story stalling, that's the story enforcing its own rules. Of course the structurally rightful king wins the first round. Of course the universe keeps trying to hand him the throne he was built for. And from a writing perspective, this is where the fun starts. We need to stop reaching for the comfort take of destiny will protect him and actually let the scarier version in. The version where Luffy has to overthrow a king who, by every plan metric the author embedded into the setting, genuinely deserves that throne more. Structurally, on paper, Teach is the correct answer to the exam, which then raises the uncomfortable question the story has been quietly daring you to ask for years. If the world crown already belongs to Blackbeard, what exactly does Luffy have to break to steal it? So when I say what does Luffy have to break, I'm not just talking about punching a guy with 2 devil fruits so hard his spine forgets its own name. I'm talking about 2 completely different blueprints for how the world is supposed to work, slamming into each other. 2 operating systems, and only one of them gets to survive the final patch. On one side you've got Blackbeard's Kingdom of Darkness. This is a kingdom in the literal old school sense. One guy at the top, everyone else stacked beneath him in neat little terror-based layers. Teach doesn't recruit friends, he acquires assets. His crew is built on opportunism and transactional loyalty, where every relationship has a price tag and an exit clause. You follow him because he's strong, because he's useful, or because you're more scared of him than you are of the Marines. That's it. Look at how his territories function after the Payback War. When Blackbeard takes islands, he doesn't liberate them. He installs himself as the new gravity well. Protection rackets, enforced worship, information monopolies. You pay tribute upward, fear downward, and the only real rule is Teach gets first pick. It's feudalism with better branding and worse dental. Now contrast that with Luffy's Sea of Friends, and I need you to really sit with the category difference here, because on the surface both guys have fleets, allies and flags, but the architecture is inverted. Luffy keeps accidentally amassing nations and pirate crews who would die for him, and then he refuses to actually make them his subjects. He literally gets gifted a grand fleet and goes, "This is fine, do whatever you want, just show up if it sounds fun." His alliances run on mutual respect and shared ideals instead of fear. Vivi, Law, the Mink Tribe, Wano, Fishman Island, none of these people are under him in a formal legal sense. There's no tax, no vassal oath. It's all handshake agreements and emotional IOUs. From a writing perspective, that is an intentional anti-king structure. The author is going out of his way to show you a network that refuses to collapse into a pyramid, even when it would be strategically convenient. So here's the thing. This is not a simple who would win in a fight bracket. This is a referendum on which model of the future gets to exist. A dark kingdom where one rightful king rules over pirates and territories through fear, or a loose confederation of free peoples who coordinate without a central sovereign. Blackbeard is the rightful king of the first model. He is perfectly optimized for it. Luffy is the champion of the second, which by definition rejects the idea that anyone, including him, should ever be a rightful king. And if you're a pattern-seeking monkey in this community who sees foreshadowing in toast, this is not a sin. This is normal. Oda has been intentionally staging every major clash, Marineford, Dressrosa, Wano, as a stress test of these two systems, which means the real endgame question isn't, can Luffy beat Blackbeard, but can Luffy's world even function once Blackbeard's world has eaten half the map? And we need to talk about how Oda has been quietly loading that question with receipts. So if Oda's been stress testing Luffy's and Blackbeard's worlds, we need to look at the receipts in the panels themselves, not the big speeches, the camera work, the tiny visual echoes your brain clocked but never filed. Because this is where the teach is a king argument stops being a theory and starts being a pattern. Here's the thing. Once you start doing panel-to-panel comparisons, it gets uncomfortable. Put Drum's throne room next to Blackbeard's first big reveal in Jaya. Wapol slouched on his oversized chair. Subjects arranged in a nervous semicircle below. Then Teach on that barrel, looming over his crew on the pier, framed from a low angle so his body eats the sky. Different furniture, same composition. One figure elevated, the rest radiating out beneath. Do the same with Dressrosa. Doflamingo on the palace balcony, legs wide, coat draped, the city a carpet under his feet. Now cut to Hachinosu, Blackbeard on the rocky outcrop, coat spread, commanders clustered below while the island's skull fortress rises behind him. You can almost overlay the silhouettes. That's not just cool villain pose territory. That's an intentional reuse of the tyrant king addressing his domain template. And then you get to the really nasty parallel. Imu and the empty throne. The camera floats behind Imu, staring down that long hall of blades and flags, the false symbol of no king dead center. Now look at Blackbeard's recurring motif. Oda keeps drawing him with his back to a rising structure. The execution platform in Marineford, the burning ruins of Baltigo, the skull mountain of Hachinosu, foreground. Teach's back, arms spread, background. A vertical mass that reads as a throne built out of the world itself. Listen to me, your pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast is not entirely wrong here. This is not a sin. This is normal visual storytelling. An author reuses compositions to quietly file characters into the same category. Wapol, Doflamingo, Imu, Blackbeard 1, dominant figure up high, flags framing the head, crowds below organised into submission or chaos depending on the point. Watch the background details. Wapol's drum banners curving around the throne, echoed by the curved mast lines and sails wrapping around Teach when he declares the new era at Marineford. Doflamingo's spiderweb of streets pointing back to the palace, mirrored by the radiating docks and alleys that all converge on Blackbeard's position on Hachinosu. The architecture keeps funneling your eye to him as a centre of gravity, as a seat, and Oda keeps hammering the same micro motif. Subordinates below, bent or broken. Burgess on his knees begging for the Mera. The Blackbeard pirates grovelling and then cheering under him after Marineford. Civilians cowering in the shadows of whatever kingdom he's annexing this week. 1 or 2 scenes could be coincidence. 10, across years and arcs, with the same angles and staging. At that point, you're not arguing with me, you're arguing with Oda's own camera. I need you to understand what that means for foreshadowing. If you still insist Blackbeard isn't being framed as a king, you have to ignore the thrones, the balconies, the flags, the crowds, the back to the throne shots, all of it. This is planned every single week. This is intentional. And the last batch of visual receipts doesn't just crown Teach, it tells you whose throne he's actually aiming for. And that's where things get ugly. And that's where we need to zoom out and put the whole framework back on the table. Foreshadowing, picture fitting, prue writing, 3 categories, 3 different tools, and the Blackbeard problem only makes sense when you see how all 3 are stacked on the same character. Foreshadowing is the intentional setup. The author knows the payoff and quietly loads the gun in Act 1. Retrofitting is the patch job. You go back to an old panel and assign it a new, sharper meaning. Prue writing is the nuclear option. The ending exists first, and the early story is just fragments of that decision scattered out of order. Now listen to me, because this is where Oda stops being a pattern on a corkboard and starts being a terrifyingly methodical writer. Blackbeard is one of the clearest pre-written endpoints in One Piece. The D, the weird body, the 2 fruits, the king imagery, the rival pirate king role, these are not vibes. These are fixtures. The man's dream speech in Jaya reads wrong on purpose because Oda is putting the series' core ideology in the mouth of the future usurper, the guy who will claim that dream for the old world instead of the new. That's pre-writing. Teach and Luffy as twin claimants to the same throne, baked in from the start. But the foreshadowing is all the little, petty, intentional tells. Ace hunting teaches a world-level threat before we even understand why. The way Teach is always framed above crowds, on balconies, on ship prows, sitting where a king should sit. The way he moves during the time skip, not as a scavenger, but as a sovereign, seizing Whitebeard's territory, bargaining with the world government, acting as if the empty throne is already his. None of that is accidental staging. That's planned, visual foreshadowing of a rival king. Then you've got the retrofits, and this is not a sin. This is normal. This is fine. When Oda later confirms the body's abnormality, or doubles down on the will of D as a crucible for chosen figures, older scenes of Teach not sleeping or being not just one person snap into focus. When the Reverie exposes the empty throne as a sham, every earlier panel of Blackbeard carving up kingdoms quietly upgrades from big pirate to political kingbreaker. The meaning escalates after the fact, but it escalates in a direction the pre-writing already pointed. Here's the thing. Inside the story's own rules, that machinery crowns Blackbeard. He is the rightful king of the old world, the perfect sovereign for a system built on conquest, fear, and rigged symbols. Within the story's heart, though, Luffy exists to break that kingship, to prove that the dream Teach quoted is bigger than the world that produced him. That tension is not a happy accident, it's the point. And if you want to talk Oda genius, this is where I need you to calm down your inner pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. His strength isn't being omniscient, it's building a villain who can believably wear the crown you always assumed belonged only to the hero. The more you respect how dangerous and legitimate Blackbeard's claim is, the more One Piece snaps into focus. So the real question isn't, will Luffy beat Blackbeard? It's what does it cost to break a king who actually deserves the throne he's sitting on? So if that's the cost question, then we need to fix the way we even talk about how Oda got us here. Because the community brain right now is stuck on one busted setting. Was this foreshadowed from Chapter 1 YE/N? That's it. That's the discourse. And listen to me. That's how you end up screaming that every shadowy panel is proof Luffy was the only destined king and Blackbeard is just a speed bump. Here's the thing. You can stop doing that tomorrow. You just need better categories. When you see Blackbeard on Jaya ranting that a man's dream never dies, that's foreshadowing. Oda intentionally puts the speech that defines the story's ideology in the mouth of the guy who will one day contest Luffy for the crown. That's a planted seed with a planned payoff. When you see Teach's weird body teased in drum and only later get the two fruit reveal, that's pre-writing. The author already decided this man breaks the rules of the world. He's not tossing in a random line and hoping it becomes important. He's showing you one shard of a decision that was locked in before you ever met this guy. And when you see something like the empty throne at Maria Joie, and then later Oda slides Imu and the secret sovereign under it, that's retrofitting. He takes an earlier symbol and jams a new, sharper blade into it. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Most long-running series run on this fuel. Once you start labeling things foreshadowing, retrofits, or pre-writing, you can ask better questions. Not did Oda plan Blackbeard as rightful king in Chapter 1, but what does it do to the story now that the guy with the D, the kingdom-stealing warlord, and the fake no-king throne are colliding? That's a way more interesting problem than playing interview detective. Pattern interrupt. Stop trying to win trivia night with God. You are not going to out-remember Oda's notebooks. I need you to treat the manga as a living negotiation between plan and discovery. When Blackbeard seizes Hachinosu, kidnaps Kobe, and moves like a rival nation instead of a pirate, you don't have to prove he was always meant to mirror Imu. You can just ask, how does crowning him now reframe all those earlier panels I skimmed past? And please, stop destiny absolutism. The assumption that Luffy is the only rightful king because protagonist flattens everything Oda is doing with multiple chosen figures. Luffy, Blackbeard, Imu, even the Will of D, carriers who never made it. If everyone is destined, then nobody's choices matter. If Luffy is guaranteed, then Blackbeard's rise is just noise, instead of a legitimate, terrifying alternative future. It's way more fun to stay curious, to hold your theories with open hands instead of carving them into stone tablets and starting a religion because you saw Jesus in a panel border. Rewatch Marineford. Reread Jaya. Track how many times Oda quietly frames Teach on a throne, above others speaking in the language of kings. Then ask yourself, if the foreshadowing has been crowning him this whole time, what exactly is Luffy stealing when he wins? And that brings us to the receipts. Because I want to walk you through the panels where Oda literally puts the crown on Blackbeard's head and dares you not to notice. And here's where we need to talk about the guy behind the curtain, because none of this works unless you understand how Oda actually writes. I need you to forget both fandom headcanons for a second. No, Oda is not a pure seat-of-the-pants gremlin freestyling 1,000 chapters on weekly fumes. But he's also not a 5D chess lich who carved the entire story into stone tablets in 1997 and has just been slowly reading them to us. Those are comforting myths. They're also wrong. Here's the thing. What the evidence actually shows is a hybrid monster. Oda pre-writes the big stuff. The D initial. The empty throne. The idea that the world was secretly built for someone like Blackbeard. Those are not improv. Those are in the outline, in the notebooks, in the terrifying stacks of reference binders this man allegedly hauls around. Then, as the story evolves, he keeps circling back, refining, sharpening, upgrading the payoff so it hits harder than the original sketch ever could. Blackbeard is the cleanest example. From Jaya, the man's dream never ends speech, is Oda stapling Teach to the core ideology of the series. That is intentional, that is planned, but the way Teach slowly mutates from goofy drunk to two-fruit abomination to pseudo-emperor sitting on stolen kingdoms, that's the improviser at work, seeing what the community latches onto and turning the dial from 10 to 12. And it takes a specific kind of courage to do what he did with that. Because when you seed your world sow the throne, the D, the history, the power structure, all point to Blackbeard as the most legitimate king, you're making a wild bet. You're betting that fans will still root for the guy whose entire role is to break that legitimacy. You're trusting that the audience will choose the king breaker over the rightful king. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact why One Piece feels different from every other shonen where destiny has the hero's name pre-engraved on the trophy. In Oda's version, Luffy doesn't win because the world was built for him. He wins because he refuses to accept a world that was built for Teach. The foreshadowing crowns Blackbeard. The story then asks whether that crown deserves to exist at all. And listen to me. That's what makes the political symbolism matter. The empty throne, Imu, the celestial dragons, the rigged idea of no king. All of that lands harder once you realize there is a real king-shaped person walking around, and it's not our rubber idiot. It's the guy Oda has been visually throning for decades. So yeah, thank you Oda, for turning me into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in every throne panel. Thank you for making me pause on wide shots of chairs for an embarrassing amount of time. And also, respectfully, this is a problem. Because now I know that even in a goofy pirate manga, your pre-writing is running a constitutional law seminar. And we're not done. Because if Oda spent 25 years quietly crowning Blackbeard, we need to talk about the one place he stopped being subtle and just screamed it at you on the page. So here's where I stop lecturing you about constitutional law pirates and hand you the homework. Because if Oda really screamed Blackbeard is a king on the page, I need you to go back and read him that way on purpose. Pick one saga, pre-time skip, post-time skip, whatever your tolerance is for early One Piece art. Now every time Blackbeard shows up, or even gets mentioned in passing, I want you to pause and ask a stupidly specific question. What if this is a king move, not just a villain move? Not what if this is foreshadowing he's evil, but what if this is planned evidence that he's a rightful claimant to a throne? You go back to Jaya and that a man's dream never ends speech. Read it as a coronation manifesto. You look at him hunting Luffy and Ace across the seas. Read it as a rival sovereign consolidating his succession case. When he invades Impel Down or steals Whitebeard's fruit, don't just go, wow, final boss entrance. Ask if an author wanted to prove this guy has a legal argument to rule the pirate era. Is this how you'd write it? And then because we're a pattern-seeking community of monkeys who see Jesus in toast and call it foreshadowing, I need you to bring receipts, panels, lines, background details every single week. Stuff I didn't touch. Drop them in the comments and tell me whether they support or absolutely destroy this rightful King Teach framing. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how you stress test a theory instead of just vibes posting Luffy Teach in all caps and logging off. Here's the thing. While you're doing that, I want you to audit your own language. Next time you call something foreshadowing or destiny or Oda cooking, stop and tag the category. Is this intentional pre-writing where the author clearly planned the payoff from day one? Is it retrofitting, where an old gag gets promoted into trauma later? Is it thematic echo? Coincidence? Just say which bucket you're putting it in. Because once you train that muscle on Blackbeard's king arc, you start seeing the difference everywhere. And don't stop at Teach. We need to apply this framework to everyone who smells even vaguely monarchic. Is Imu the false god king of the world that Luffy has to topple? Is Vivi the rightful heir to a version of the world government that never existed? Is Kid or Law or even Shanks a rightful king of some old order that has to break before the new age can breathe? If Blackbeard is the rightful king of piracy, who's the rightful king of the void he's trying to fill? So treat the comments as the continuation of the analysis, not the food court where discourse goes to die. Map your evidence. All out counterexamples. Tell me which saga broke the theory for you, because once we've reread Blackbeard as a king on purpose, we can finally talk about the moment Oda stopped hinting and just put the crown in your face, and you still missed it. Because here's the thing, once you admit Oda has been drawing a crown on Blackbeard's head in permanent marker, you hit a very uncomfortable question. If this world, as written, would point at Teach and go, yeah, that's our king, but you and I are still screaming Luffy from the cheap seats, what does that make us? Not passive readers, not neutral observers. That makes us the weirdos in the back of the execution plaza booing the coronation the story's own power structures are trying to sell you. The Marines, the world government, the Yonko system, the bounty game, the great pirate era hype machine. Every formal mechanism of authority in this story is built to recognize someone exactly like Blackbeard. A man who seizes territory, manipulates timing, weaponizes the will of D as a brand, and then sits on an actual throne of subjugated islands. And we went, no, actually, I'm with the rubber idiot who refuses to sit down. I need you to clock how radical that is. In universe, everything about the way power is measured, bounties, territories, fleets, titles, says Teach is the correct answer to the question, who should rule this sea? He's the one who plays by the rules of the game Oda has spent 1,000 chapters explaining. Luffy's whole thing is breaking the board in half and eating the pieces. So when we choose Luffy anyway, we're not just picking the nicer guy. We're rejecting the world's criteria for Rightful. We're saying if the category is best at domination, we refuse the category. That's not an accident of fandom taste. That's Oda weaponizing foreshadowing to turn you into a revolutionary without you ever planting a flag. Remember the opening rant where I yelled that we as a community had lost the plot? This is what I meant. We quietly fused rightful king and good guy into one term in our heads, then got confused when the author kept handing the crown to the worst person in the room. This is not a sin. This is normal. Your brain wants the pattern where the hero wins the throne, because that's how most storytelling has trained you. But Oda has been telling you for years that those are two different jobs. The man who best fits the world's planned structure of rule is not the man you actually want ruling. That's the problem he's been staging, from Jaya to Marineford to the empty throne at Mary Joy's. So here's your homework. Next time Oda drops a panel of Blackbeard framed on high, arms spread, teeth bared, composition screaming king, don't just file it under villain hype and scroll to the reaction gifs. Stop and ask, in what kind of world is this the correct answer? What does it say about the sea, the system, the centuries of hidden authors behind the world government, that this is the guy who fits their crown perfectly? And then, maybe, ask what it says about you that you refuse to accept it. Listen to me, I have to go lie down. I have just spent 2.5 hours arguing that the fattest, loudest man in One Piece is the rightful king, and the moral of the story is please don't root for kings. If your brain is buzzing, good. Tell me in the comments which throne you think Oda wants you to topple first, and then we need to go reread those Blackbeard spreads with treason in mind.